The sun had long forgotten this corner of the Mojave, where dreams went to die and dust ruled the earth. But that day, under a sky burning like copper, a single mother with an empty gas tank and a broken heart stumbled upon something that should not exist, a glint of silver buried in the sand. At first, she thought it was a mirage. Then the wind shifted, revealing the tail of a private jet, half swallowed by the desert. She didn't know it yet, but inside that wreck lay a secret worth $250 million. The sun had long forgotten this corner of the Mojave, where dreams went to die and dust ruled the earth. But that day, under a sky burning like copper, a single mother with an empty gas tank and a broken heart stumbled upon something that should not exist, a glint of silver buried in the sand. At first she thought it was a mirage. Then the wind shifted, revealing the tail of a private jet, half swallowed by the desert. She didn't know it yet, but inside that wreck lay a secret worth $250 million. Emily Carter had driven past the same stretch of highway countless times before, a thin, cracked ribbon of asphalt cutting through nowhere. But this time, it wasn't adventure that carried her forward. It was desperation. Her last paycheck had vanished into bills. The restaurant she'd worked at for 7 years had shut down overnight. Her daughter's school fees were past due. Every mile she drove now was fueled by the last drops of hope clinging to the bottom of her tank. The radio hissed static, the only voice left to accompany her silence. The air was dry, the heat a living thing pressing against the windshield. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as the low fuel light blinked in warning. She had promised her daughter she'd be home before dark. Now even that promise felt fragile. She slowed the car near an abandoned gas station, its sign bent, letters missing, ghosts of prices from another decade. There was no one, no sound, only the creak of wind through rusted metal and the endless hum of heat. She stepped out, her boots crunching against the sand, eyes squinting against the glare. That's when she saw it, a reflection, faint but deliberate, from far beyond the dunes. Something metallic catching the sun. For a moment she thought it was a piece of scrap, maybe an old car part, but it didn't move with the wind. It shimmered like something waiting to be found. Curiosity whispered louder than caution. She shielded her eyes and walked forward, the desert crunching beneath each step. The air shimmered in waves, distorting distance, tricking the senses. Minutes stretched into eternity as her shadow followed her like a ghost. Then, through the haze, the shape began to form, smooth, curved, elegant. It wasn't junk. It was art buried in tragedy. The sand fell away under her hand as she brushed it back. Metal revealed itself, smooth and cold. Her breath caught. Letters appeared, faded but proud. Vander. She didn't know the name, but it sounded like wealth, like something that once belonged to another world entirely. The silence grew heavier. Her pulse quickened. She stepped back, scanning the dunes. There, half consumed by earth, lay the body of a plane, its wings torn, its nose buried deep. No smoke, no signs of life. Just a forgotten monument of luxury left to rot under the sun. Emily's heart pounded. Logic screamed to turn back, to drive away before night swallowed her. But something deeper, something desperate kept her frozen in place. The jet looked untouched, unclaimed, unreported. Like a secret the desert wanted to keep. She ran her fingers along the broken edge of the fuselage, the metal still cool beneath the sun's rage. The door was sealed shut, a ghostly barrier between poverty and possibility. A gust of wind blew sand across her shoes, whispering stories of what once might have been. She could almost hear laughter from another life, champagne bubbles, silk dresses, the hum of engines before the fall. For a fleeting moment, she imagined stepping inside, seeing what the desert had hidden all these years. But fear rooted her to the ground. If there were bodies inside, She couldn't face them, not now, not with her own life already hanging by threads. She turned back toward her car, but her gaze lingered on the gleaming silver tail jutting from the sand. It was beautiful, in a tragic way, like a fallen angel buried beneath the dust of time. The sun dipped lower, painting everything in molten orange. Emily climbed back into her car, her throat dry, her thoughts restless. As the engine coughed to life, she looked once more at the shape in the distance. It almost felt like it was watching her, like it knew she had seen it. That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that glint again, the silver, against the endless tan of the desert. It wasn't just a plane, it was a sign, a whisper from fate, telling her that her life didn't have to end in quiet failure. The next morning, long before dawn, she stood outside her trailer with a flashlight in one hand and a small bag slung over her shoulder. The desert was still, hushed like a church. Her daughter slept inside, unaware that her mother was about to step into the unknown. Emily glanced back once, her chest tightening. Then she turned toward the horizon, where the dunes waited. Somewhere out there, the jet slept beneath the sand, carrying a story no one had told in decades. Her boots sank into the cool earth as she began her walk, guided only by the ghostly shimmer she had seen before. Every step echoed in her chest, the rhythm of fear and hope beating together. The sky brightened slowly purple, then rose, then gold. And as the first light spilled across the dunes, the silver tail appeared again, glinting like a secret sunrise. Emily's breath trembled. This time she didn't stop walking. The desert stretched out endless before her, but the fear that once held her back was gone. In its place, something else had taken root, a dangerous kind of faith. Because deep down, she already knew, whatever waited inside that fallen bird was about to change everything. And as the wind began to howl across the empty plains, Emily Carter, the woman who had nothing left to lose, stepped into a story that the desert had been dying to tell. As the horizon shimmered and the world held its breath, she whispered to herself, almost as if making a promise, "This time I'm not running away." The sand shifted beneath her boots, the echo of fate stirring in the silence. The jet loomed closer now, its metal skeleton emerging from the dunes like a relic of the gods. And in that moment, beneath the rising sun, Emily felt something she hadn't in years, the fragile pulse of destiny. As the morning wind brushed her hair and the light danced over the forgotten wreckage, the desert seemed to whisper her name as if welcoming her home. The flightless bird was waiting, and Emily Carter had just found her wings. As the sun climbed higher, she took her final step onto the buried wing, the silence around her shifting heavy with secrets yet to be revealed. The story was only beginning. The sand whispered beneath her boots as Emily climbed onto the tilted wing, her breath uneven from both fear and wonder. Up close, the jet was massive, its once gleaming surface now corroded, its edges softened by years of wind and silence. Time had eaten through its skin, leaving streaks of rust like veins across its silver body. She ran her hand across it, brushing away the fine dust that clung to everything here. The faint scent of metal and decay lingered in the air. The door was half buried, its handle fused in place by years of corrosion. Emily leaned closer, squinting at the faded paint, at the remnants of a once luxurious insignia now ghosted by time. She pressed against it gently. Nothing. It didn't budge. She tried again, harder this time, the metal vibrating with her effort. The sound echoed through the hollow air, sharp and startling in the silence. She paused, heart pounding. The desert held its breath. For a moment, she imagined someone answering back from inside. But there was only the wind, whispering through broken vents. Emily stepped back, scanning for another way in. One of the windows had cracked open. a spiderweb fracture across its surface. Beneath it, the frame had separated from the fuselage, just enough to let her see darkness within. She crouched, peering through the slit. The light caught only fragments, a curve of leather, a shimmer of gold, the outline of a seatbelt frozen mid-buckle. It was beautiful, even in ruin. She pulled out her phone and started recording. The lens trembled slightly in her hands as she whispered, almost to herself, "Found a jet, out here in the Mojave, looks old, really old." Her voice cracked with awe and fear, blending into the low hum of wind. "I don't know whose it was, but it's still here." She stopped recording and stood there, breathing slowly. Something about this wreckage didn't feel random. The sand had almost completely swallowed it, but not enough to erase it. It was as if the desert had tried to hide the truth but changed its mind. Emily scanned the horizon. No roads, no footprints, no tracks of any kind, just her car far in the distance, a speck of human life against an endless sea of dust. She felt small, yet somehow more alive than she had in months. Her gaze fell again to the cockpit windows. One was broken inward, shards of glass resting like jagged crystals inside. The edges looked sharp, but it might be her only way in. She hesitated, weighing the danger against the pull in her chest. Then, with a breath that tasted like courage and dust, she climbed. Her hand caught the rim, her boot slipped once, but she steadied herself. With a firm push, she pulled her body through the narrow gap. The smell hit her, first stale air, trapped for decades. It carried the ghost of perfume, leather, and jet fuel, a blend of life and death preserved in time. Inside, the light was dim and golden, filtered through cracked windows. Dust floated in beams of sunlight like drifting spirits. The silence was heavy, too perfect, as if the world outside no longer existed. Her feet sank slightly into the carpet, still plush beneath the debris. The seats were leather cream once, now dulled to the color of bone. A glass of champagne still sat on one of the armrests, its contents long evaporated, but the shape of a celebration frozen forever. The insignia she'd seen outside appeared again, embossed in gold on the seatbacks. Vander Hale. Emily whispered it aloud. The name felt foreign, expensive. A family name, maybe. One that didn't belong anywhere near her life of thrift stores and overdue rent. She walked further in, her flashlight trembling across the surfaces. The cabin was eerily untouched, no signs of fire, no signs of panic. It was as though time had stopped mid-flight, holding its breath for a moment that never came. Her light caught something on the floor, a shoe, delicate, glittering faintly. A woman's, expensive. Nearby, a briefcase rested against a seat, its leather cracked but intact. The initials M.V.H. were engraved on the latch. Emily reached for it, fingers brushing off the dust, but it wouldn't open. The lock was still engaged, a small brass piece unyielding to her grip. She sighed, setting it back down carefully, her curiosity burning brighter. Her flashlight drifted toward the cockpit door. It stood slightly ajar, the metal hinges creaking softly with each gust that seeped through the cracks. She swallowed, pushing it open. The cockpit was a frozen moment of chaos, buttons and switches half lit, papers scattered across the floor. 2 seats, both empty. A faded map still lay unfolded across the console, with coordinates circled in red ink. Her beam landed on a worn leather logbook resting against the control stick. She picked it up, brushing it clean. Vander Hale Jet 909 flight record. The last entry was dated 20 years ago. The writing beneath was smeared but legible. Route, Los Angeles, Geneva. Weather, clear. Status, en route, ETA 0422. Note, do not contact tower. This flight is private. Emily's breath caught. Private, no contact, that meant no record, no rescue, no one ever came looking. She flipped the page and saw something else, faintly written in the corner. A signature. Marcus van der Hale. She recognized the name from old news headlines, a billionaire heir accused of fraud and embezzlement, who vanished without trace. But she'd been a teenager then, half a lifetime ago. She never followed the story. Now, standing inside his ghostly plane, she realized this wasn't just wreckage, it was history. Her heart raced, the air felt thicker, her pulse loud in her ears. She turned slowly, her flashlight brushing across the empty cabin. Every shadow seemed to move with her. She could feel the weight of time pressing down, and underneath it, something else. Expectation. The desert outside moaned with wind. Emily took one last glance at the cockpit and whispered, "What happened to you?" The question vanished into the silence. She stepped out of the cockpit, her hands trembling slightly. Something metallic caught her eye near the rear of the cabin, a faint gleam from beneath one of the seats. She crouched, brushing away the dust. It was a latch, small and hidden. Her heartbeat quickened. She tugged at it, but it didn't move. It was locked. Beneath the seats, faint outlines of compartments ran the length of the cabin, sealed tight, invisible unless you were looking closely. She frowned, tracing them with her hand. The metal was cold, reinforced. Whatever was inside was meant to stay hidden. The air around her seemed to hum. She stood there for a long time, staring at those hidden lockers, the truth teasing just out of reach. Then she stepped back toward the broken window, the sunlight blinding her as she climbed out. Outside, the wind had picked up, swirling sand around her ankles. The world felt different now, charged, electric. She could almost feel eyes watching her from somewhere beyond the dunes. As she trudged back to her car, her thoughts tangled: awe, fear, disbelief. She clutched her phone against her chest, replaying the images she'd recorded. Proof, evidence, maybe even salvation. When she finally sat behind the wheel, her reflection in the cracked mirror startled her, sunburned, dusty, but alive in a way she hadn't been in years. She looked back once more at the horizon, at the faint shimmer of the jet's tail, barely visible in the distance. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Only the quiet realization that something extraordinary had just crossed her path, and it was waiting for her to return. As the engine sputtered to life and the desert wind howled around her, Emily whispered into the fading silence, "Tomorrow. I'll come back tomorrow." And though she didn't know why, the desert seemed to answer a single gust of wind, carrying the promise of everything she was about to lose, and everything she was about to find. As the last light faded over the dunes, Emily drove away with trembling hands and a racing heart, unaware that fate had already begun its quiet descent over her life. The story was only beginning. Morning broke over the Mojave like a blade of light cutting through the night's silence. The desert shimmered endless, golden, alive in a way that both comforted and threatened. Emily Carter stood by her car again, the same stretch of empty road before her, only now it felt different. Yesterday she had come here as a woman running from her life. Today she returned as someone pulled by something she couldn't explain, a whisper buried in the sand, calling her back. She had barely slept. Every blink of her tired eyes the night before had shown her flashes of that silver tail, that ghostly aircraft half buried beneath the dunes. Her hands had trembled when she tried to eat. Even coffee had tasted like dust. She told herself it was madness to go back yet. As the first light crawled across the horizon, she found herself already driving, headlights cutting through the pale dawn. The world around her felt suspended, no sound but the engine's hum, no sign of life but her own reflection in the windshield. The Mojave had a way of swallowing sound, of making even time hesitate. She parked closer this time, near a cluster of dried shrubs that barely passed for shelter. The air was cooler, sharp with the promise of heat to come. She strapped her old backpack tight, stuffed with water, gloves, and a small crowbar she'd borrowed from the maintenance shed behind her trailer. The desert didn't care about preparation, it only respected determination. As she stepped over the first dune, the jet appeared slowly, a sliver of silver against the golden expanse. The morning light gave it an ethereal glow, like something sacred left behind by the gods. She felt her pulse rise again. Her boots sank into the sand with each step, the sound soft and rhythmic heartbeat against the earth. As she neared the wreck, the silence returned, deeper now. The air around the jet was colder, as though it held its own weather, untouched by the world beyond. She climbed onto the wing again. Her footprints from yesterday had already vanished, erased by the shifting sands. Only the plane remained unchanged, a monument to secrets and time. Emily crouched by the broken window she'd used to enter before. The glass glimmered faintly, shards scattered like jewels across the sand. She hesitated for a moment, then hoisted herself up and slid through. Inside, the light was dim and dust danced lazily in sunbeams filtering through cracks. The air was heavy, almost reverent. Everything was as she left it: the leather seats, the folded map, the glass of long, evaporated champagne. But this time, she wasn't just looking, she was searching. She switched on her flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom like a blade. The polished gold edges on the seats gleamed faintly beneath years of dust. Every detail spoke of wealth, the kind she had only ever seen on television. Gold-trimmed mirrors, crystal fixtures, carpeting soft enough to belong in a mansion. And yet, beneath that faded grandeur, something felt wrong. It wasn't just decay, it was silence, a silence too deliberate. Emily ran her hand across a nearby seat, tracing initials embroidered into the headrest: MVH. The same initials she'd seen on the briefcase. Marcus Vander Hale, billionaire heir, vanished mid-flight. Declared dead 2 decades ago. She swallowed hard. The story had been everywhere once, headlines screaming of betrayal, stolen wealth, and a vanishing act that baffled the world. But now, standing inside the ghost of his plane, it didn't feel like history. It felt alive. The flashlight flickered briefly, casting long shadows that moved like ghosts across the cabin walls. Emily steadied her hand, forcing a breath. "It's just the wind," she murmured, but even her voice sounded strange here, too loud, too human. She crouched near the rear seats again, where she'd found the faint outlines of hidden compartments before. The small latch was still there, buried beneath the layer of sand that had spilled in through the broken fuselage. She pressed at it, fingers trembling with effort. The latch clicked faintly but didn't open, locked deliberately. Her curiosity surged. Whoever sealed these compartments had done it with intent. She grabbed the crowbar from her pack, wedged its edge beneath the latch, and pushed. The metal groaned but held firm. She tried again, harder this time. Her muscles burned, then crack. The latch gave way slightly, releasing a puff of stale air from inside the hidden compartment. Emily froze. Her flashlight hovered over the opening, the beam trembling. Inside, the light caught something agleam, subtle but unmistakable. She leaned closer. The glint became sharper, refracting in tiny flashes of color. Her breath stopped. Gems, hundreds of them, rubies, emeralds, diamonds, each one resting in small velvet pouches, sealed and untouched. The light fractured through them, painting the cabin walls in kaleidoscopic fire. Emily's heart thundered. She sat back, her breath coming fast. The world around her tilted. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, hallucinating from heat or exhaustion. But the gems were real, their weight undeniable, their beauty almost cruel in its perfection. She reached out, hesitating, then touched one. It was cold, real, solid. Her pulse quickened. She looked around, half expecting anyone to appear, to tell her she wasn't supposed to be here. But there was no one, only her and the ghosts of the past. She picked up a ruby, small and blood red, holding it up to the sunlight. The light poured through it like living fire. Her reflection shimmered in its depths, the face of a woman who had been forgotten by the world, now staring into the very thing that could change everything. Her throat went dry. Her mind raced with impossible thoughts. What if it's still worth something? What if this could fix everything? Then, as quickly as the excitement came, guilt followed. What right did she have to touch this, to even be here? This wasn't hers. Someone had died here, maybe many people. And yet, the idea of walking away felt unbearable. The air shifted. A low moan of wind passed through the fuselage, whispering like a warning. Emily closed her eyes, clutching the ruby tightly. "I'm not stealing," she whispered to no one. "I just need proof." Her voice quivered, swallowed by the silence. She took a single pouch and tucked it into her pocket. Just one. Enough to prove it was real. Enough to ask questions later. Then she carefully closed the compartment, pressing the latch until it clicked back into place. The plane felt different now, heavier, more watchful. She could almost feel its gaze on her as she made her way toward the exit. The desert light outside was blinding, white and merciless. She blinked against it, stepping down carefully from the broken window. The wind had picked up, sending thin streams of sand snaking across the dunes. She turned back once, staring at the jet, its silver body gleaming faintly beneath the rising heat. It looked peaceful again, as though nothing had happened. But Emily knew better. The secret was awake now. She climbed back into her car, heart still racing, fingers trembling around the steering wheel. She opened the small pouch and looked once more at the ruby resting in her palm, glowing like captured sunlight. A laugh escaped her lips, part disbelief, part terror. She whispered, "You're real." For a long time, she just sat there, staring. Then instinct pushed her to do what she always did. When the world didn't make sense, she searched for answers. She pulled out her phone, opened her browser, and typed the only thing that made sense: Vander Hale jet disappearance. The signal was weak, but a few headlines loaded. Vander Hale family declared deceased after 20-year search. Suspected fraud cover-up leads to scandal before flight disappearance. Marcus Vander Hale accused of embezzling millions before vanishing mid-flight. Her pulse slowed, replaced by dread. The man whose jet she'd just explored wasn't just a billionaire, he was the ghost of a crime. Emily's hand tightened around the ruby. The desert stretched before her, silent, endless, knowing. She looked back at the faint silhouette of the jet one last time. The wind howled softly, carrying dust across the sand like whispers of judgment. And in that moment, she understood this wasn't luck. It was a curse buried in beauty. As the sun began its descent, the desert shimmered like a mirage again, and Emily Carter drove away unaware that the past she had just unearthed was already turning its eyes toward her. By the time Emily's car rolled back into the small trailer park, the sun had melted into a deep orange haze. The desert seemed to breathe behind her, hot air rising from the earth like memory itself refusing to fade. The ruby in her pocket felt heavier with each passing mile, as if it carried not just weight but consequence. She parked in front of her rusted trailer and sat there in silence. The engine ticked softly, a dying heartbeat. Her fingers trembled when she reached into her pocket and pulled the small velvet pouch out again. The jewel caught what little light remained, glowing faintly, red as blood. Emily placed it on the dashboard and just stared. The reflection of it shimmered in the cracked glass, a tiny ember of impossible fortune. Her mind replayed the day in fragments. The silent jet, the dust, the shimmer of wealth buried in death. For years, her life had been about survival, counting dollars, dodging overdue bills, making promises to her daughter she could barely keep. And now, sitting there in the half-light, she was staring at a stone that could erase it all. But it didn't feel like a miracle. It felt like a test. She stepped out of the car, the cool evening wind brushing her hair. The world was quiet. Her trailer glowed faintly from inside her daughter's small shadow moving across the curtain. That sight grounded her. It reminded her why she'd gone out there in the first place. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cheap soap and worn-out dreams. Her daughter, Lily, was sitting on the couch with a coloring book, her tiny hands covered in marker ink. She looked up with a sleepy smile. "Mom, you're late." Emily forced a smile, brushing dust off her jeans. "Yes, sweetheart, got a little lost." Again, Lily giggled. Emily knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The innocence in that small face made her chest ache. She wanted to tell her everything about the desert, the plain, the jewels glinting in the dark. But how could she? It sounded like madness, like something born of exhaustion and desperation. "Go wash up," she whispered. "I'll make dinner." As the child ran off, humming, Emily sat down on the couch, staring at her own dusty hands. The world outside hummed faintly, the sound of power lines, the occasional passing truck. But in her mind, she was still in that jet, the silence pressing against her chest like a secret she couldn't unhear. When Lily was asleep, Emily took the pouch back out. She set it on the kitchen table under the dim light bulb. The ruby gleamed alive, almost breathing. She turned it over in her hand, studying every angle. Then she did what desperation always demanded. She searched for meaning. Her fingers typed quickly into her phone, how to identify gemstone authenticity. Dozens of results appeared. She compared the images, the clarity, the cut. Every sign pointed to one truth. It was real. Her pulse quickened. Real meant valuable. Valuable meant freedom. But freedom never came without a cost. She clicked on another article, a list of missing valuables connected to the Vander Hale case. And there it was, buried in an old archive. Estimated value of stolen Vander Hale assets, approximately $250 million in diamonds, rubies, and uncut sapphires. Her breath left her body. She leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling, the enormity of it pressing down. This wasn't just treasure. This was evidence, the kind people killed to bury. Her eyes drifted toward the window. The desert beyond was dark now, the moonlight pooling faintly across the sand in the distance. Somewhere out there lay the rest of the jewels, untouched, unseen, waiting. But even from here, Emily could feel the weight of the decision growing. She turned off her phone and whispered into the empty room, "What have I done?" Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it came fractured dreams of engines roaring, of faceless figures in tailored suits, of the desert swallowing secrets whole. At one point, she woke in a cold sweat, certain she'd heard something outside, a faint rustle, the crunch of gravel under slow footsteps. She got up, heart hammering, and peeked through the blinds. Nothing, just the endless dark, her reflection staring back. But for a moment, she thought she saw movement, a shadow near the road, a flicker of headlights far away. By morning, she convinced herself it had been imagination. The desert could play tricks when guilt was heavy. She dropped Lily off at school, her mind still fogged with unrest. The ruby sat in her glove compartment, wrapped in a napkin. Every few minutes, she'd glance at it, half expecting it to vanish, half terrified that it wouldn't. When she returned home, she sat outside for a while, the wind dry against her face. The trailer creaked as it always did, but the sound carried a new weight, the kind that came before something changed forever. She took out her phone again and searched deeper into the Vander Hale story, old newspaper archives, forum threads, conspiracy blogs. There were theories everywhere: insurance fraud, a staged crash, hidden accounts, a cover-up by the family itself. But one detail stood out. The official record said the jet was never found. No wreckage, no debris, nothing. Emily's chest tightened. That couldn't be right. She'd seen it. She'd touched it. She clicked the article again. Investigators believe the aircraft was lost over the Pacific. Last contact recorded near international waters. She whispered, "That's impossible." She zoomed in on an old photo of Marcus van der Hale, a man in his early 30s, sharp suit, confident smile. The kind of man who had everything. The caption below read, "Accused of laundering charitable funds through offshore accounts." Emily frowned. Charitable funds, that detail lingered, threading through her thoughts like a faint melody. She closed the article, her hands cold. Something wasn't right about the story the world had been told. She stood, pacing. Her eyes caught the pouch again on the counter. The ruby gleamed under the sunlight filtering through the blinds. It looked innocent, but she could almost feel the history bleeding from it. Somewhere, someone had hidden that plane for a reason. Emily grabbed her jacket. The desert outside was calling again, not with the promise of wealth this time, but with questions that refused to stay buried. By the time she reached the edge of the highway, the sky was turning pale again. The dunes shimmered under the growing light, the same eternal quiet stretching in every direction. As she stood there, a truck roared by, stirring the sand into spirals. She shielded her eyes, glancing toward the horizon where she knew the jet still lay, untouched, waiting like a ghost. The wind carried faint whispers across the plain, as if the desert itself wanted to speak, but didn't dare. Emily whispered back, "I'm coming." She climbed back into her car, the ruby glinting once more from her palm before she tucked it into her pocket. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked different now, not defeated, not desperate, but haunted. The kind of look only a secret could give. As she drove, the miles blurred into a rhythm, the hum of the engine, the hiss of sand, the steady pounding of her pulse. Each mile brought her closer not just to the wreck, but to something darker, a truth that shimmered beneath the surface like heat. She didn't notice the black SUV that passed her going the other way, tinted windows, no license plate visible. Its reflection glided over hers for a moment, a silent omen crossing paths with destiny. Emily's gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead. The desert stretched wide, endless, shimmering with secrets, and somewhere, beneath its golden skin, waited the truth of the Van der Hale empire. The ghost was no longer sleeping. As the wind rose again and sand spiraled into the air, Emily Carter drove back toward the buried jet, unaware that someone else had already found her tracks. The story was only beginning. The morning sun came up pale and cold, stripped of its warmth by the sharp wind sweeping through the Mojave. The dunes shimmered under its light, like the skin of some ancient creature breathing beneath the earth. Emily Carter parked her car closer this time, her tires sinking slightly into the sand. The hum of the engine faded into the endless quiet. She sat there for a moment, fingers gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm the trembling in her hands. This wasn't adventure anymore, it was something darker, something she didn't understand, but the ruby in her pocket burned like a pulse, and every time she tried to ignore it, her mind whispered the same truth. There was more in that jet. Emily stepped out, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. The air tasted like metal and dust, sharp and dry. She slung her backpack over her shoulder, the crowbar tucked inside once again. Then she began to walk. The desert had already erased her footprints from yesterday, as if it wanted to pretend she'd never been here. Only the faint shimmer of the jet's silver body marked the horizon, glinting in defiance against the monotone sea of gold. By the time she reached it, the sun had climbed high enough to sting her eyes, the air rippled with heat. She paused at the base of the fuselage, hand resting on its cool metal. Even under the blazing sun, the jet felt cold, unnaturally so. She climbed through the same broken window, her movements more confident now. The silence inside welcomed her, thick and heavy, as though time itself had stopped breathing. The smell hadn't changed: dust, leather, decay. But now it was layered with something else: anticipation. Emily's flashlight cut through the shadows, illuminating the gleaming surfaces within. The interior still radiated luxury: gold trim, velvet drapes, crystal fixtures, all frozen in elegant ruin. But her focus was on the floor, the compartments she'd found before, those hidden lockers beneath the seats. She knelt down near the one she'd pried open yesterday. The latch hung loose, the faint scrape of metal echoing as she ran her finger across it. She took a deep breath and began searching the rest. There were more, 6, maybe 7, stretching along both sides of the cabin, each sealed shut, their seams hidden beneath layers of sand and carpet. She pulled out the crowbar again and wedged it under the next latch. It resisted, then groaned. Her arm shook with effort. The sound rang through the empty jet, metallic and hollow. Then snap, the latch gave way. A rush of stale air hissed from the narrow gap. She pushed the panel open and froze. Inside, dozens of small velvet bags rested neatly in rows, identical to the one she had taken yesterday. Her breath hitched. The flashlight beam trembled across the contents, diamonds this time, clear and hard as frozen stars. The light refracted off their surfaces, scattering across the cabin like splintered lightning. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, the way it does just before a storm. Emily stared, unable to move. There was enough wealth in that one locker to rewrite entire lives, to erase every debt, every hunger, every fear she had ever known. Her hands shook as she lifted one bag, the gems clinking softly like whispers. It was almost unbearable, the beauty and the danger intertwined. She set it down, her heartbeat racing. She opened another compartment, more jewels, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, a silent ocean of color and light. Each locker was a chest of frozen fire, a collection of the world's most coveted lies. She sat back slowly, her knees weak. The silence around her deepened until she could hear her own breath echoing off the cabin walls. "This can't be real," she whispered, but even as she said it, she knew it was. The heat outside pressed against the fuselage, but in here it was cold. A chill crept up her spine. These jewels had been waiting untouched, preserved, as if the desert itself had been guarding them. Emily's flashlight flickered over the cockpit door. Beyond it, the empty pilot's seats loomed like hollow eyes. Something inside her shifted, curiosity mixing with dread. She wanted to know what had happened, who had locked these treasures away. But a part of her also feared the answer. She turned her attention back to the gems. There were millions here, maybe hundreds of millions, but her practical mind clawed through the haze of wonder. "You can't sell this," she whispered to herself. "You can't even explain this." Still, she reached for one bag and slipped it into her backpack. Just one more, she told herself, for proof, for safety. The moment she zipped it shut, the air changed. The silence broke with a sound, faint but real, a click. Her head snapped up. It came from the rear of the plane, a metallic shift like weight moving. "Hello," she called out, voice breaking. No answer. Only the creak of the fuselage as the wind pressed against it. Her heart pounded. The desert was empty. She was alone. She had to be. But as she turned the flashlight toward the sound, the beam trembled across the floor, and there, in the thin layer of dust near the rear door, were footprints. Fresh ones. Her breath caught. Someone else had been here. She backed up slowly, scanning the shadows. Every corner of the jet seemed alive now, breathing with the echo of unseen presence. The wind howled outside, rattling the broken window. Emily forced herself to move, crawling toward the cockpit, her pulse a roar in her ears. She needed to think, to hide, to escape, to understand. She crouched near the pilot's seat, shining the light across the panels. That's when she saw it, the logbook, lying open now. She hadn't left it that way. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The last page was torn, ink smudged across the paper like blood. The final words were barely legible, but she could read enough. They know, they found out. Her stomach turned cold. The desert wind screamed outside, loud enough to drown out thought. She stuffed the logbook into her bag, her instincts screaming at her to leave. She turned toward the window she had come through, but paused. Footprints weren't just near the back door. They led toward the wing, out, away. Someone had been here, and left. Her eyes darted to the open lockers, the exposed jewels glimmering faintly under her flashlight. She realized with a sickening twist that she wasn't the only one who knew about this place anymore. Emily stumbled out through the window, dropping into the sand below. The sunlight was harsher now, the air hotter. She looked around, nothing but dunes and heat haze, but she could feel it. She was being watched. She hurried back to her car, her breath quick, her vision blurry with panic. The wind pressed against her ears, whispering in a language only the desert understood. When she slammed the car door shut and turned the key, the engine groaned, then sputtered to life. She gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. In the rearview mirror, the desert shimmered, and for one fleeting second, she thought she saw movement on the ridge. A glint of glass, maybe a reflection or binoculars catching the sun. She blinked. It was gone. Her heart hammered as she pressed the gas, speeding across the sand. The plane grew smaller in the mirror until it disappeared completely. But the chill in her chest didn't fade. It deepened. Whatever secrets the desert had hidden for 20 years, they weren't sleeping anymore. And now, because of her, they were awake. As the sun reached its cruelest height, Emily Carter drove back toward the safety of her small world, unaware that somewhere behind her, a shadow had begun to follow. The story was only beginning. The wind was louder that evening, sweeping through the trailer park like a restless tide. It rattled the thin aluminum walls and whistled through the cracks of Emily Carter's window, carrying with it the scent of dust and unease. She sat alone at her kitchen table, the glow from her small lamp flickering across the ruby and diamond bags spread out before her. Her hands were steady now, too steady. The kind of calm that only comes after fear has run its course and left behind something colder. She stared at the jewels under the light, each one glimmering like a frozen heartbeat. They looked harmless, beautiful even, but Emily knew better. Beauty like this never came without a story written in blood. Her phone screen glowed beside the gems. The article she'd found earlier still stared back at her. Vander Hale jet missing since 2003. The world believed it had vanished somewhere over the Pacific, but she'd walked through its ghost. She'd touched its bones. Her reflection wavered on the black screen as she whispered, "Why the desert?" Her voice barely sounded human anymore, hoarse from fear, dry from the Mojave's breath. She looked toward the window. Outside, the dunes slept under the moonlight, pale and endless. But even here, miles from the wreck, she felt its presence as if the jet had followed her home, still whispering in her ears through the shifting wind. She reached for one of the diamond bags and lifted it close to her face. The stones caught the lamplight and fractured it into cold fire. They were perfect, too perfect. Her daughter's soft breathing came from the small bedroom behind her. Emily's eyes softened for a moment. The jewels meant security, safety, a future. But every instinct screamed that they were cursed, that she'd pulled something ancient and wrong from its grave. She placed the bag down and leaned back, running both hands over her face. The silence in the trailer was too complete. Even the hum of the refrigerator had stopped. Then click. The sound was faint but sharp, not from inside, from outside. Emily froze, every muscle tightening. She turned her head slowly toward the window. Nothing but the shifting curtains, whispering in the breeze. She waited, breath shallow, ears straining. Another sound, gravel crunching softly under weight. Footsteps. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She stood quickly, moving to the window and pulling the curtain just enough to peek through. The desert was quiet, empty. But then she saw its headlights. Far away, near the edge of the highway, they lingered for a moment, then vanished, as if swallowed by the night. Emily backed away from the window. The trailer suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Her gaze darted toward the table, the jewels still spread out, gleaming like a beacon. She swept them into the pouch, tied it shut, and shoved it deep into a drawer. Her pulse was a drumbeat now. No one knows, she told herself. No one could know, but deep down she didn't believe it. The footprints in the sand, the sound in the wreck, the torn page in the logbook, it all pointed to one truth. Someone else had been there. Someone else was looking for what she'd found. She turned off the lamp and stood in darkness, her eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight leaking through the curtains. Every creak of the trailer sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like breath on her neck. After what felt like hours, she finally sat back down, her hand gripping the crowbar she'd left by the door. Sleep wouldn't come, not tonight. When dawn arrived, it came pale and distant, like light through dirty glass. Emily hadn't moved. Her eyes were hollow from exhaustion, her thoughts scattered. The desert looked peaceful again, but peace was a lie she no longer trusted. She made coffee she didn't drink, stared at the steam until it faded. Then she picked up her phone and opened the recording she'd made inside the jet. Her voice echoed back, shaky, nervous, filled with awe. She turned the volume up, listening to the silence behind her words. Halfway through, something made her stop. A sound, barely audible, buried under static, a whisper. She rewound, played it again. It was faint, but real, a voice, low and urgent in the background. Male. Only 2 words, distorted but clear enough to freeze her blood. They're coming. Her hand shook. She turned the phone off and stared at the black screen. The voice hadn't been hers, and she'd been alone in that plane. A chill crept up her spine. What if the voice had been recorded before the plane's last moments? Or worse, what if it hadn't been old at all? She stood abruptly, knocking the mug from the table. It shattered, coffee spilling across the floor like blood in water. Lily stirred from the next room, her small voice groggy. "Mom," Emily forced her tone calm. "It's okay, sweetheart, go back to sleep." The child's voice faded and silence fell again. Emily knelt, cleaning the spill with shaking hands. But her mind wasn't on the mess, it was on that voice, those 2 words, and the unmistakable certainty that whatever had been buried wasn't finished with her. She needed answers. That afternoon, while Lily was at school, Emily drove into town. The roads shimmered with heat, mirages stretching like ghosts across the pavement. She parked near a faded library on Main Street, one of the few places left where she could dig through old public records without drawing attention. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of paper and time. She sat at an old computer, the screen humming faintly. With careful fingers, she typed, "Vander Hale Crash Investigation Archives." Dozens of results appeared, most linking to dead pages or closed reports. But one caught her eye, an archived government file stored in a local digital repository. She clicked it. The file was heavily redacted, lines of black hiding most of the text. But fragments remained visible. Flight path, deviation, confirmed location, inconsistent with transponder signal. Communication silence intentional, possible sabotage. Cargo manifest unlisted, sealed by court order. Her stomach tightened, cargo manifest sealed. She leaned closer, scrolling further. At the bottom, a single unredacted line read, "Declared lost, assets unrecovered, family investigation terminated." Emily sat back, her pulse hammering. The Vander Hale plane hadn't simply crashed. It had vanished on purpose, and those jewels weren't stolen treasure. They were cargo. A sound behind her made her flinch. A man at another computer, glancing her way briefly before turning back to his screen. Her heart calmed for a moment. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the reflection of another figure in the glass of the library window, someone standing just outside, watching through the door. A chill ran through her veins. She closed the browser, grabbed her bag, and walked quickly out of the library. Outside, the figure was gone. The street was empty. The sun glared off the windows of parked cars. She stood there for a moment, the desert wind tugging at her hair. Then she caught a flicker of movement, a black SUV turning onto the road, its tinted windows swallowing the light. Her blood turned to ice. It was the same shape she'd seen the night before, the same silent watcher on the highway. She hurried to her car, keys trembling in her hand. The SUV didn't follow, but she could feel its presence even after it disappeared in the mirror. By the time she reached home, the air felt wrong, heavier somehow, charged. She parked and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, breathing fast. Her phone buzzed. A notification, unknown number. She unlocked it. A single message appeared. You shouldn't have gone back. No name, no number, just those words. Emily's throat went dry. The screen dimmed, reflecting her own frightened face. She turned toward the window. The wind had picked up again, the desert howling softly in the distance. The jewels in the drawer pulsed faintly with the fading light, catching the sunset like dying stars. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "What did I bring back with me?" Outside, the last light of day slipped beneath the dunes, and in the reflection of her trailer window, something moved, a figure, standing still, watching. As darkness swallowed the desert once more, Emily realized the past was no longer buried, it was coming for her. And the whisper of the wind was no longer just whined. The next morning broke grey and restless, the kind of dawn that felt more like a warning than a beginning. Emily Carter sat at the edge of her small bed, still in the same clothes from the night before. The message on her phone burned in her mind, "You shouldn't have gone back." She'd deleted it, but the words lingered, etched into her thoughts like scars. Her reflection in the mirror across the room looked hollow, haunted. The sleepless nights had left shadows under her eyes, and behind them, the desert still lived endless, watching, whispering. She turned to the window. The trailer park was silent, too silent. The wind had stopped. The world outside felt like it was holding its breath. She walked to the small counter and poured herself a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. It tasted bitter, metallic. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the mug. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, made her flinch. She couldn't stay here forever. She needed answers. The Vander Hale name had become a curse in her mind, powerful, mysterious, unreachable. But somewhere inside that curse was truth, and if she could find it, maybe she could understand why a 20-year-old jet was buried in the Mojave like a coffin full of jewels. Emily sat down with her laptop, the screen's glow cutting through the dimness. She typed Marcus Vander Hale, again this time, not through news headlines, but through the forgotten corners of the internet. Most of the results were old, articles about embezzlement, the family's collapse, whispers of criminal dealings. But deeper down, buried in the obscure pages of forgotten blogs, she found something different, a personal story. The blog belonged to a journalist named Calvin Dreer. The last entry was from 19 years ago. The title read, "The Billionaire Who Vanished Himself." Emily's pulse quickened as she began to read. Marcus Vander Hale wasn't running from the law. He was running from the people who owned it. The Vander Hale fortune didn't vanish, it was taken, cleaned, and hidden. The jet that disappeared over the Pacific, it never reached the ocean, it was last seen over the desert. The truth was buried long before the plane ever touched the ground. Her chest tightened. She scrolled further. Sources close to the family claim Marcus had discovered that his father's charitable foundation was a front for money laundering, using donations to move illegal funds across continents. When he threatened to expose it, everything began to fall apart. He wasn't escaping punishment, he was escaping murder. Emily's fingers hovered over the trackpad. She whispered, "Oh my God." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker, the jewels, the sealed lockers. The secrecy, it all began to form a shape that terrified her. She read the last paragraph. If this ever reaches the public, it means I'm gone. Marcus was betrayed by his own blood. His death wasn't an accident. And if the jet is ever found, the people responsible will do anything to silence whoever touches it. The entry ended abruptly. Emily leaned back in her chair, the words echoing through her head. Betrayed by his own blood. Silenced, her phone buzzed, startling her. She grabbed it quickly, just an unknown number again. She hesitated, then answered. Hello, static. Then a low male voice, calm but rough, like gravel over glass. Stop digging, Emily. Her throat closed. Who is this? A pause. Then click. The line went dead. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked around the room instinctively, the air thick with invisible eyes. The world outside seemed to lean closer, listening. She locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and backed away. The silence roared in her ears. She could almost hear the hum of the jet again, the whisper of engines that hadn't run in 20 years. But fear couldn't stop her now. It was too late for that. She reopened the blog post and scrolled to the bottom again. There was a single hyperlink in small grey text, archived photos. She clicked it. A series of old, grainy images loaded. Marcus Vander Hale with politicians, charity events, lavish parties. Then one caught her eye, a photograph of Marcus standing beside his private jet. The same tail number she had seen on the wreck. But next to him, almost in the background, stood another man. Emily zoomed in. The image was blurry, but his face was cold, sharp. He looked like Marcus, same eyes, same bone structure, but harder, more calculated. The caption beneath the image read, Elias Vander Hale, younger brother. Her breath caught. Marcus had a brother. She clicked the name. No records, no social profiles, no mentions. It was as if he had been erased. She leaned back, whispering, "Where did you go?" The name lingered in her mind like a shadow. Elias Vander Hale. She glanced toward the drawer where the jewels were hidden. The secrets of that family had crossed oceans, buried in metal and sand, and somehow they'd found her. Outside, a car engine idled faintly. Her head snapped toward the window. She moved quietly, parting the curtain just enough to see through the thin slit. A black SUV sat across the street, engine running, tinted windows reflecting the pale daylight. Her stomach dropped, the same one. She stepped back, heart racing. The SUV didn't move. It just waited, patient as death. Minutes stretched like hours. She turned off her lights, grabbed her bag, and slipped quietly toward the back door. The desert behind her trailer stretched out wide and silent. She ran bare feet against sand, lungs burning, every breath slicing through the dry air. She didn't look back until she reached the ridge beyond the park. The SUV was gone. Only the stillness of the Mojave remained vast, indifferent. Emily stood there, hands on her knees, trembling. Her thoughts spun like torn paper in a storm. The jewels, the voice, the SUV, the warning, they were all threads of the same web. And now, she was caught in it. She stared toward the horizon, where the dunes met the sky. Somewhere out there lay the jet, sleeping in the sand, but maybe, she thought, it wasn't just a crash site. Maybe it was a graveyard not for people, but for truth itself. The wind picked up, scattering dust around her. It carried with it a sound that could almost have been a whisper, faint, distant, like a name, Elias. She shivered. The sun climbed higher, painting the desert in liquid gold. And standing there, Emily Carter realized that her discovery wasn't about money anymore. It was about legacy, lies, and blood. As the wind howled through the empty plains, she whispered to herself, if Marcus was murdered, then his story isn't finished. Her gaze hardened. She turned toward her car, the resolve in her steps stronger than fear. She would find out who Elias Vander Hale was and what he was hiding. The truth had slept long enough. As the wind carried the echo of her name through the desert once more, Emily started the engine and drove toward the horizon, unaware that the ghost she sought was already watching her from the other side of the sand. The desert stretched endlessly before her, rolling dunes painted in shades of amber and rust. Emily's old sedan shuddered over the cracked road, its engine whining like it wanted to turn back. The heat distorted the horizon, blurring reality into a trembling haze. She hadn't told anyone where she was going, not that there was anyone left to tell. Lily was at her friend's house for the weekend, safe for now. Emily had whispered a promise before leaving, "I'll be back soon. I just need to find something." But what she was really searching for was clarity, answers buried beneath 20 years of lies. The name Elias Vander Hale echoed in her head like a curse she couldn't stop saying. The lost brother. The ghost who vanished before the world could even ask why. If Marcus had been murdered, then Elias was either part of the truth, or the one who'd buried it. She parked at the edge of a weather-beaten gas station, the kind that looked more like a memory than a place. A single attendant sat outside under a crooked awning, a cigarette burning lazily between his fingers. Emily approached cautiously, her eyes darting to the faded open sign flickering in the window. "Excuse me," she began, voice cracking from the dryness in her throat. "Do you know if there's an old airfield nearby? Maybe military, maybe private." The man squinted at her, the sun reflecting off his dusty glasses. "There used to be one," he said, his tone slow, uncertain, "about 20 miles north. Government shut it down back in the 90s. Folks say it's haunted now. You don't want to go there, miss. Every gem, every coin, it all traced the money my father laundered through his charity. The plane was carrying evidence. Marcus and I planned to deliver it to people who could expose him." Emily's pulse quickened. Then why the crash? Elias's gaze drifted to the floor, because someone made sure it never reached its destination. He looked up again, his eyes like storms. "And now that you've found it, they'll make sure you don't either." The hangar creaked as wind howled through its broken seams. Dust swirled around them like ash. Emily took a step back. "You sent that message," she said. "You've been watching me." Elias hesitated, then nodded. "To keep you alive." "But now it's too late. They know who you are. You led them right to it." The words hit her like a slap. "Who are they?" Before he could answer, the sound of engines thundered across the desert outside, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Elias's expression hardened. "We need to move." Emily clutched the file against her chest, the pages fluttering in the dry wind. "Where? Anywhere they're not," he said sharply, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the back exit. "You wanted the truth. You've just stepped into it." As they sprinted out the rear of the hangar, dust exploded around them, engines roaring closer. Emily looked back, once black SUV cutting through the dunes, sunlight flashing off their windshields. Elias tightened his grip on her arm. "Don't look back," he said. "If we stop, we die." They ran until their lungs burned, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them like thunder over the sand. As the first shots cracked through the dry air, the truth Emily had chased finally caught up to her, and the desert once again became a battlefield of secrets, greed, and ghosts that refused to stay buried. The desert wind howled like something alive that morning, restless and sharp. Emily Carter had been running for what felt like forever, though the sun said otherwise. She and Elias had escaped the hangar hours ago, yet every echo of the dunes still felt like footsteps chasing them. Every gust of wind carried the memory of those engines, those black SUV closing in. Now, miles from the airfield, they hid beneath the jagged remains of an old mining outpost, a skeleton of wood and iron buried half in the sand. Emily crouched behind a broken wall, lungs burning, heart hammering. Elias stood a few feet away, scanning the horizon with binoculars that looked like they'd seen a lifetime of survival. "Are they gone?" she whispered. Elias didn't answer immediately. His face was unreadable, carved from silence and dust. Finally, he lowered the binoculars and shook his head. "They'll never be gone. Not now." Emily swallowed hard, glancing at the cracked folder still clutched in her trembling hands, the flight log, the proof. "Who are they?" she asked. "Who's following us?" Elias turned toward her, eyes shadowed beneath his brow. "The same people who buried my brother. The same ones who buried that jet." His words hung in the dry air, heavy as the heat itself. Emily pressed her back against the wall, trying to catch her breath. Her thoughts were spinning. Lily, the jewels, the crash, the name Vander Hale echoing in her mind like a curse. "You have to tell me everything," she said, her voice steadier now. "If I'm risking my life, I need to know why." Elias crouched beside her, his voice low, almost a growl. "Marcus was never supposed to die. He wanted to expose what our father built, a network that turned charity into currency. When he threatened to go public, they came for him. The jet wasn't an accident, it was an execution." Emily stared at him, every word sinking into her like ice. "And you, I tried to stop it," Elias said quietly, but the family name meant more to them than truth. "I faked my death before they could erase me too, been hiding ever since." She shook her head, disbelief flickering through exhaustion. "So all this time, you've just been watching, waiting." He met her eyes, waiting for someone stupid enough to find the wreck. Emily almost laughed, but it came out as a ragged breath instead. "Lucky me," she muttered. Elias stood, his gaze scanning the distant horizon again. The sun had climbed higher, bleaching the world into blinding white. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll track your car. They'll track everything." Emily followed his gaze. The thought of returning home to her trailer, to Lily, made her chest ache. "My daughter," she said suddenly. "She's at her friend's house. If they're watching me, they'll find her." Elias interrupted, his tone flat, almost cruel in its honesty. "You've already led them close." Emily's face drained of color. "No," she whispered. He turned to her, his expression softening for the first time. "Then you better get to her first." They drove through the desert in silence. The sky shimmered, the landscape stretching endlessly, oppressive in its beauty. Every turn of the tires kicked up ghosts of sand. Emily gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. Elias sat beside her, watching the rearview mirror like a soldier expecting fire. "Who are they exactly?" she asked finally. "Government, private security." Elias's jaw tightened. "Both. The foundation our father ran it wasn't just about moving money. It was about influence. Politicians, oil barons, arms dealers all bought with the same dirty wealth. When Marcus found out, he tried to turn whistleblower. They couldn't let that happen." Emily glanced at him, her pulse quickening. And those jewels? Currency, Elias said simply, small, untraceable, perfect for buying silence. A chill rippled through her. She'd held one of those jewels in her hands, a ruby the color of blood. She remembered how beautiful it looked in the sunlight. Now it felt like holding sin. Elias continued, his tone low and certain. They'll want it all back. The gems, the logs, the ledger, every trace of what connects them. You saw the wreck. You took something, and that makes you a liability. Emily gripped the wheel harder. I didn't take all of it. You took enough, he said, looking at her. They'll never believe otherwise. She turned onto the highway, the tires roaring against the cracked asphalt. The radio hissed faintly with static. The silence between them felt heavier than the heat. How do you know all this? She asked after a moment. Elias's eyes flicked toward her. Because I used to be one of them. The words landed like a blow. Emily's foot eased off the gas. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw the weight in his posture, the scars hidden beneath composure. You helped them, she said softly. I was born into it, he replied, his tone sharp but not defensive. You don't choose a family like mine, you survive it. Marcus tried to end it, and now, maybe you'll finish what he started. Emily exhaled shakily, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. Neither did he, Elias said. They fell silent again. The world around them shimmered mirages, twisting in the distance like ghosts of water they'd never reach. As they neared the edge of town, Emily's nerves began to buzz. Every car that passed felt like surveillance. Every intersection, a trap. She turned down side streets instinctively, heart racing, until she finally reached her small trailer park. It was too quiet. The wind had stopped. The air hung still, thick with tension. Emily parked 2 lots down, killed the engine, and stared. Her trailer door was slightly open. No. She breathed. She stepped out, the gravel crunching softly beneath her shoes. The world seemed to narrow to that one doorway, the gap between what she hoped and what she feared. She glanced at Elias, who nodded once, eyes scanning the area. They approached slowly. Emily pushed the door open. It creaked. Inside, the air was stale. Everything looked the same: the couch, the lamp, the photos, except for one thing. The drawer where she'd hidden the jewels was open, empty. Her pulse exploded in her chest. They were here. Elias moved toward the window, pulling the curtain aside slightly. They still are, he murmured. Outside, a dark SUV idled across the road. No movement, no noise, just waiting. Emily's hands trembled as she backed away from the window. They know about Lily, she whispered. Elias's voice hardened. Then we move now. You call her, tell her nothing. Just get her to meet you somewhere public. Then we disappear. Emily fumbled for her phone, her fingers clumsy with panic. She called Lily's friend's mother, no answer. Called again, still nothing. The ringing felt like a countdown. Then, finally, hello, Mrs. Grant, it's Emily, she said quickly, her voice shaking. Is Lily with you? A pause. No, sweetheart. She said you came to pick her up an hour ago. The world went silent. Emily's breath caught. No. No, she didn't. She dropped the phone, her body turning cold. Elias's gaze met hers, dark and unblinking. They have her, he said quietly. The room swayed. Emily stumbled back, her knees weak, her hands gripping the edge of the counter for balance. Her mind screamed in every direction, but the sound couldn't escape her throat. The SUV engine rumbled to life outside. Elias grabbed her shoulder. You want your daughter back, he said, his voice cutting through the panic. Then you help me finish what Marcus started. You find out who ordered that crash, you expose them. It's the only way we both survive. Emily's eyes filled with tears, not from fear but from fury. Her voice came out low and raw. Then let's make them wish they never found me. As the SUV drove away, leaving only dust in its wake, Emily Carter stood in the shadow of her shattered life, no longer running, but burning with purpose. The story had stopped being about survival. Now it was about war. The sun had already begun to sink behind the dunes when Emily Carter realized that her world had officially split in two, the life she'd known, and the one she could never go back to. Her daughter was gone. The trailer sat hollow and violated, every familiar object now foreign, contaminated by intrusion. The air itself felt poisoned with the scent of fear. Elias stood by the window, watching the street. His silhouette was still, but his eyes moved like radar, scanning every shadow. The black SUV was gone now, swallowed by the horizon, but its presence still lingered like a phantom heartbeat. "They won't hurt her," Emily said finally, though her voice cracked around the lie. "They can't. She's just a kid." Elias turned, his face cold and calm, the kind of calm that came from surviving too many lies. "You don't understand the kind of people we're dealing with. They don't see her as a child, they see her as leverage." Emily shook her head, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. "Then what do they want? Everything," Elias said simply. "The jewels, the ledger." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "Then they can have the jewels," she snapped. "I don't care about the money, I just want my daughter back." Elias's eyes softened, just for a moment. "They don't make deals, Emily. They make examples." The words hit her like a knife. She turned away, fighting for air that didn't taste like sand. The desert beyond the trailer seemed to pulse with heat, endless and indifferent to her panic. "What do we do?" she asked finally, her voice barely audible. Elias moved toward the table, where the empty drawer still gaped open. "They think they have all the leverage," he said, "but they don't know what I still have." He pulled a small object from his coat, a flash drive, battered and scratched, wrapped in tape. "This is what Marcus died protecting. The jewels were only proof of the money. This," he held it up, and the dim light caught its metallic edge, "is the proof of why. Every transaction, every name, every account, it exposes all of them." Emily stared at it, trembling. "Then give it to them," she said. "Trade it for my daughter." Elias shook his head sharply. "That's exactly what they want you to think. The moment they have this, you'll both be dead." She felt her stomach twist. "Then how do I get her back?" Elias's expression hardened. "We turn the board, make them chase us instead of her." He crossed to the window again, eyes fixed on the far road. "They'll keep her somewhere nearby until they know they can flush you out. You're not valuable to them dead, yet only desperate." Emily sank into a chair, her body shaking from exhaustion. The day's weight pressed down on her like a mountain. She could still hear Lily's laughter echoing in her head, a cruel reminder of innocence stolen too soon. Elias looked at her, his voice lowering. "Emily, I know what it's like to lose someone to them. Marcus tried to protect me. It cost him everything. Don't make his mistake." She looked up slowly, tears catching the light. "Then help me not to." They left the trailer before nightfall. Elias insisted on burning what they couldn't carry: papers, clothes, traces of life. Emily watched as her home, her memories dissolved into fire. The orange glow reflected in her eyes, flickering with both grief and resolve. When it was done, the two of them stood in silence, watching the flames die into embers. Elias handed her a cap and scarf to cover her face. "We move fast, stay invisible," he said. "There's a safe house outside the canyon, old contacts. People who owe me favors." Emily nodded numbly, gripping the backpack that held her only possessions: water, a flashlight, and a picture of Lily smiling on her 5th birthday. The drive was long and quiet. The world outside was painted in the bruised colors of twilight purples and golds bleeding into black. Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the window. The reflection of her own face ghosted over the dunes. She finally spoke. "When did you fake your death?" Elias didn't look at her. "The night of the crash." Marcus thought we'd both die out there. But I got out before it hit the sand. He didn't. Emily turned sharply toward him. You left him. His jaw tightened. I thought he was right behind me. By the time I went back, the plane was gone. She studied him for a long moment. And you've been hiding ever since, hiding and watching, he said. I made it my life's work to find out who killed him. The trail led me here to you. Emily frowned. To me? He nodded. The wreck wasn't supposed to be found. The fact that you stumbled on it means someone inside their network failed. You're the variable they didn't account for, the one piece of chaos in a system built on control. The weight of his words settled between them. She wasn't just unlucky, she was the crack in the foundation of a secret empire. The road narrowed, twisting through canyons bathed in silver moonlight. The silence grew heavier with every mile. Then, far behind them, headlights appeared faint but steady, weaving through the dark like hunting eyes. Elias saw them first. His tone dropped to a razor's edge. We're not alone. Emily glanced in the mirror. The light grew closer, splitting into 2, then 3. Oh God, she whispered. Hold the wheel. Elias ordered, pulling a pistol from under the seat. When I say, turn off the headlights and take the next turn. She gripped the wheel tight, knuckles white, her breath shallow. The desert blurred past, the road barely visible in the fading light. The headlights behind them grew brighter, too bright, too close. Now. Elias barked. Emily cut the lights. Darkness swallowed them. She turned sharply onto a dirt road, the car bouncing violently over rocks. Dust erupted behind them, masking their trail. The pursuing lights overshot, vanishing into the distance. They drove in silence for several minutes, heart pounding until the road leveled out again. Emily exhaled shakily, her hands trembling on the wheel. Elias glanced back. They'll find the trail again soon. We buy time, nothing more. She nodded, tears glinting in the dim dashboard light. I can't lose her, she whispered. Not like this. I can't. Elias's gaze softened. Then don't you fight. You stay alive. That's how you win against people like them. You outlive their fear. The wind howled through the cracks of the old road, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from her burning home. Emily's jaw set, her eyes steady. Then we make them afraid of me. Hours later, they reached the canyon, a hidden stretch of earth carved by time, surrounded by cliffs that caught the moonlight like silver knives. At the base stood a small, crumbling structure built into the rock, the safe house Elias had promised. Inside, the air was cool and damp. The smell of stone and old paper filled the small space. Elias lit a lantern and handed Emily a blanket. You rest. We move again at dawn. But Emily didn't lie down. She stood by the small window, staring out at the vast emptiness beyond. The stars glittered cold and distant, like 1,000 eyes that didn't care. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. They took everything. My job, my home, my daughter. Elias turned toward her. Then take something back. She looked at him, her face half shadowed, half illuminated by the lantern flame. What? The truth, he said. Emily's eyes narrowed, her fear beginning to harden into something else, resolve. The night outside stretched on, deep and endless. The desert had taken her peace, her comfort, her innocence, but it hadn't taken her will. She sat down beside the window, clutching Lily's photo to her chest, whispering into the darkness. I'm coming for you, baby, no matter what it takes. The wind rose again, whistling through the cracks like a vow carried into eternity. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the canyon in pale gold, Emily Carter's fear began to burn into purpose. The hunt was no longer one-sided, and for the first time, the people who had taken everything from her were about to feel hunted. The first light of dawn bled across the desert like a wound reopening. The canyon walls glowed faintly, catching the gold of the rising sun. Emily Carter sat awake against the cold stone wall of the safe house, eyes open, unblinking. She hadn't slept. Every creak of wind through the rock, every flutter of sand outside had sounded like footsteps. Lily's photo lay beside her, worn at the edges, the smile fading in the soft morning light. She traced the outline of her daughter's face with a trembling thumb. Somewhere out there, Lily was waiting for her, scared, alone, maybe calling her name. The thought kept her heart beating when exhaustion tried to drag her under. Elias stood near the doorway, packing supplies, water, rope, a rusted compass that looked older than both of them combined. He moved with the cold precision of someone who had spent years learning not to feel. Eat something, he said quietly without turning. I can't. He glanced over his shoulder. You'll need your strength. What's coming won't be easy. Emily forced herself to her feet, rubbing her sore arms. You keep saying that, she murmured. What's coming? More running, more hiding. Elias looked at her for a long moment before answering. No, we're done hiding. She frowned. Then what? He turned away, his voice low. We go back to where it started. Emily felt her stomach twist. The jet? Elias nodded. You said you saw something, hidden compartments, sealed lockers. What you didn't find was the flight recorder, the black box. She blinked. After 20 years, that thing still works. If we can get to it, yes, he said. It doesn't matter if it's broken or not. What matters is what it contains. Cockpit recordings, final transmissions, proof that this wasn't an accident. Emily crossed her arms. And you think whoever took my daughter didn't already grab it? Elias shook his head. They wouldn't have known where to look. The plane was designed with redundancies, hidden safes, decoy compartments. Marcus had it customized before the flight. He knew what was coming. Emily stared at him, realization creeping in. You think he planned the crash? Elias hesitated, then nodded once. Not the way it happened. But he knew something would go wrong. That's why he told me to remember the coordinates. Her voice trembled. And you kept them all this time? Elias's gaze dropped to the sand beneath his boots. They were burned into me. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind crawling across stone. Emily's pulse quickened. The idea of returning to that buried metal corpse both terrified and tempted her. Somewhere inside that wreck was truth, not just about Marcus and the jewels, but about who had taken Lily and why. She exhaled slowly. Then let's go. By noon, the heat was relentless. The sun hung like an unblinking eye, and the desert stretched in every direction, shimmering, endless, alive. The drive back toward the crash site felt heavier this time, every dune carrying the memory of what they'd left behind. Elias guided her through backroads invisible to most maps, paths only someone who had once lived off shadows could know. The air shimmered, the landscape twisting into mirage. Finally, the silver glint appeared again, faint but undeniable. The jet, the flightless bird. It looked even more unnatural now, like something that had clawed its way out of the earth only to die again. The wind whispered through the open windows of the fuselage, carrying with it the ghosts of forgotten voices. Emily parked at a distance. Her pulse quickened as she stepped out, boots crunching against the dry ground. The same silence greeted her, that strange, holy quiet that seemed to belong only to places where tragedy had refused to decay. She turned to Elias. If that recorder's still in there, where would it be? He adjusted his hat against the glare. Beneath the cockpit. It'll be sealed in the avionics bay, behind reinforced plating. Emily frowned. You sound sure. Elias's eyes darkened. I helped design the modifications. They moved cautiously through the wreckage. The air inside was cooler, thick with the scent of metal and decay. Dust floated lazily in beams of sunlight, turning everything gold and ghost-like. Emily's flashlight traced the walls as she led the way. Every creak of metal made her flinch. It feels different now, she whispered. It should. Elias replied, It's awake. She stopped, turning to him. What do you mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he knelt near the cockpit door, prying open a corroded panel with a small tool from his jacket. The metal shrieked, echoing down the cabin. Emily winced. Behind the panel was a narrow crawl space filled with wires and broken instruments. Elias reached inside, pulling free a piece of melted plastic, tossing it aside. Then another heavier, darker. He froze. Emily leaned in, her heart pounding. Is that it? Elias turned slowly. In his hands lay a rectangular box, scorched but intact, its surface marked with the faint lettering, CVR Cockpit Voice Recorder. Emily's breath caught. The black box. Elias brushed sand off its casing, his expression grim. It survived. What's on it? She asked. He met her eyes. The truth. The weight of the moment pressed down on both of them. Emily looked at the device, a single object that could unravel everything, that could explain the ghosts haunting the desert, that could tell her who had taken her daughter. Then a sound, a crunch, soft, deliberate, outside. Elias raised a hand, motioning for silence. Emily held her breath, listening. The sound came again, closer now. Footsteps on sand. Elias moved quietly to the window, peering through the shattered frame. His voice dropped to a whisper. 2 vehicles. North Ridge. Emily's blood ran cold. The same ones, probably worse. He grabbed the recorder, stuffing it into his pack. Move. They slipped out through the back of the fuselage, ducking low against the scorching wind. The horizon rippled with movement, shadows of figures approaching from the distance, their outlines breaking against the light. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. The desert seemed to tighten around them, endless yet suffocating. We'll never outrun them in this, she said. Elias looked around, scanning the terrain, his gaze fixed on the far ridge, a narrow pass between 2 dunes. There's an old storm drain from the mining days, he said quickly, half buried, but deep enough to hide us. Move. They ran, the sound of gunmetal engines growing louder behind them, the sand kicking up beneath their boots. The sun burned their backs. Emily's lungs screamed, but she didn't stop. Not while the truth was clutched in Elias's hands. Shots cracked across the desert. Bullets ripped through silence, sending sprays of sand into the air. Emily stumbled, dropping to her knees. Elias yanked her up. Keep moving. They dove behind the ridge just as the SUV came into view, their black bodies gleaming like predators. Emily pressed her back against the rocks, gasping for air. Elias crouched beside her, checking the recorder, his fingers tight around it. They know, he muttered. Someone tipped them off. Emily's mind raced. Then it's not just them watching. It's someone else. He met her gaze. Someone closer than you think. The words cut deep, but before she could respond, a bullet shattered the rock inches from her head. The sound exploded through the canyon. Elias grabbed her hand. Go. They ran deeper into the ridge, where shadows swallowed them whole. The gunfire faded, replaced by the echo of their ragged breaths. Finally, they reached the storm drain, a circular pit half. Buried in sand, the metal cover rusted and crooked. Elias kicked it open, revealing darkness below. After you, he said. Emily hesitated only a moment before climbing down, her hands scraping against the cold metal. The air below was damp, stale. Elias followed, sealing the hatch above them just as the sound of engines drew near. The darkness enveloped them. Only the faint red light from recorder's emergency diode glowed in the black. Emily's whisper broke the silence. What now? Elias's voice came from the dark, steady, but laced with something heavy. Now, he said, we listen. He pressed a button on the recorder. Static filled the drain, then a faint voice emerged. A man's voice, trembling, desperate. They found out. They're following us. Tell Elias. The audio cut to static. Emily froze. He was trying to reach you. Elias's jaw clenched, his face ghostly in the dim red glow. He knew it wasn't the storm that would kill him. The recording resumed, the sound of alarms, the chaos of a cockpit spiraling out of control, and a second voice, cold and calm. Terminate the flight. Now, Emily's breath stopped. That voice. Who is that? Elias looked at her, the red light reflecting in his eyes like fire. That, he said, was my father. As the black box crackled with the final echoes of betrayal, the truth Emily had searched for finally spoke, and it was darker, deeper, and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The sound from the recorder hung in the darkness like a curse, static swallowing screams, engines roaring. Then silence. That silence felt alive, pressing against the walls of the drain, heavier than the desert itself. Emily Carter couldn't breathe. Her hands shook around the flashlight, its narrow beam flickering over Elias's face. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were distant, fixed on the darkness, where his father's voice had echoed moments before. Terminate the flight, now. The words wouldn't leave her head. They repeated again and again until they became rhythm, mechanical, merciless, absolute. Emily swallowed hard. Your father gave the order. She whispered. He killed them. Elias didn't answer. His face was carved from stone, but the tremor in his hands betrayed the storm underneath. He pressed the stop button, and the recorder went silent. The red light dimmed until only shadows remained. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the slow drip of condensation echoing through the tunnel. Finally, Emily broke the quiet. What does it mean? Why would he? Elias cut her off, voice sharp, almost trembling. Because Marcus tried to stop him. Because he found out what the Foundation was really doing. Emily's chest tightened. Money laundering. He shook his head. That was the small part. The jewels, the offshore accounts, they were just the surface. My father was funding private wars. Governments pretending to be charities. Refugee relief money turned into weapons. Emily's stomach turned. The scale of it hit her all at once, an empire of greed disguised as mercy. Elias's voice dropped lower. Marcus recorded proof of it, the ledgers, the codes. He was on his way to hand it to international investigators. My father couldn't let him reach Geneva, so he silenced him. Emily whispered. Elias's jaw clenched. He silenced everyone. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the recorder. And now he's coming for us? Elias looked up, the red glow catching the hollows under his eyes. He's been coming for me for 20 years. The words sank into the damp air like stones sinking into deep water. Emily took a breath, her voice unsteady but defiant. Then we finish what Marcus started. We use this, the black box, the files, we expose him. Elias gave a bitter laugh. Expose him to who? The same people he owns. You think the truth matters to men like him? He built the system. He can erase it. Emily stepped closer, her eyes fierce. Then we make it matter. Elias stared at her, and for a moment she saw the man beneath the scars, tired, fractured, and bound to a legacy of sin he couldn't escape. You don't understand, he said quietly. My father doesn't just buy power. He creates it. Every person in his orbit owes him something. Politicians, police, media, intelligence officers, even the ones who think they're clean. Emily's voice hardened. Then he doesn't own me. The silence after that was electric. The wind above the drain howled faintly through the opening, a lonely sound that carried the weight of centuries. Finally, Elias sighed and looked away. We can't stay here. They'll sweep the wreck again. Once they don't find our bodies, they'll start looking for tracks. He stuffed the recorder into his pack and began climbing the rusted ladder up toward the surface. The metal groaned under his weight. Emily followed, every movement echoing through the hollow pipe like gunfire. When she emerged, the sun had begun to fall. The light was copper, bleeding across the dunes. Everything shimmered: heat, sand, fear. They moved quickly, keeping low, heading toward the rocky hills where shadows gathered like protection. The wind picked up, stinging their faces with dust. Behind them, the wreck glowed faintly in the dying light, a monument to greed and death. As they climbed higher, Emily paused, catching her breath. If your father's still alive, she said, then who's running all this? Who took Lily? Elias stopped, glancing back at her, his expression unreadable. He's alive, he said flatly. I've seen him. Emily's chest tightened when, 2 years ago, a private meeting in Dubai. I tracked one of his shell corporations. I wasn't supposed to make it out. She stared at him, disbelief cutting through the exhaustion. You saw him. After everything, Elias's eyes met hers. He looked right at me, smiled, told me he was proud I learned how to hide. Emily felt the world tilt beneath her. He knows you're still alive. He's known all along. The wind roared suddenly, like the desert itself reacting to the truth. They reached the crest of the hill. The sky burned red now, the horizon bleeding into shadow. From up there, Emily could see everything, the wreck in the distance, the endless sea of sand, and far off, a faint shimmer of light. Headlights, she pointed. They're coming. Elias nodded grimly. They'll reach the wreck by nightfall. Once they find it empty, they'll start sweeping outward. We need to disappear before then. They made camp in the shallow of a canyon, hidden between slabs of rock that cast deep shadows. Elias lit a small fire, the flame flickering weakly against the cold air. Emily sat beside him, hugging her knees, watching sparks drift into the darkness. You said the black box isn't enough, she said quietly. Then what is? Elias stared into the fire, his eyes distant. The ledger, it's still out there. Marcus hid it before he took the flight. Her breath caught. Hidden where? Elias hesitated. He never told me. But I know how he thought. He would have put it somewhere symbolic. Somewhere that couldn't be traced to him but meant something to our family. Emily frowned. So we go digging through your past? He looked at her. No. We go through his. The flames flickered across their faces, throwing shadows that seemed to move like ghosts. Emily's voice softened. You think this can really end it? The ledger, the black box, all of it? Elias didn't look away from the fire. No, but it might be enough to make the right people start asking questions, enough to make him afraid. Emily nodded slowly, staring into the fire until her reflection blurred. Good, she whispered, because I want him afraid. The wind shifted again, colder now, carrying with it the scent of nightfall. The desert stretched endlessly beyond, but somewhere in that emptiness, the answers waited, buried in the legacy of the Vander Hale name. Elias reached into his pack, pulling out the recorder again. He set it between them. The faint red light blinked like a heartbeat. There's more, he said. He pressed play, static. Then Marcus's voice, clearer this time, urgent, broken by breath. They're closing in. If you find this, Eli, don't trust anyone. Not the board, not the foundation, not even the police. They all serve him. Take the ledger to the orphanage. That's where it began. That's where it ends. The recording cut out. Emily looked up sharply. The orphanage. Elias's face went pale. Our father's first charity. She whispered, the one he used to build the foundation. He nodded slowly, eyes dark. The place where he learned how to make suffering profitable. The realization hung in the air between them like a prophecy. Emily stared out toward the horizon where the last light faded into night. The wind moaned low through the canyons, carrying whispers of the past. So that's where we go, she said quietly. Elias met her eyes, the firelight glinting off the scar above his brow. And once we do, he said, there's no going back. Emily glanced down at the black box, the faint red glow pulsing in the dark like a warning. There's nothing left to go back to. Above them, the stars emerged cold, ancient witnesses to sins buried beneath sand and time. The fire crackled, defiant against the void. Emily closed her eyes, the image of her daughter's face burning behind them. Her whisper was barely audible, carried by the wind. I'm coming for you. And for him. As night swallowed the desert whole, Emily Carter and Elias Vander Hale sat beside the dying fire, the ghosts of the past finally speaking through static and flame, and for the first time, they knew where the road of truth would lead next. The night bled slowly into morning, the desert sky bruised with shades of violet and ash. The wind carried a chill now, soft but sharp, the kind that whispered of ghosts and secrets buried too long. Emily Carter stirred awake beside the dying embers of the campfire, her body aching, her throat dry as dust. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The canyon walls around her stood tall and colorless, the stars fading one by one into the waking light. Then memory returned: the wreck, the chase, the black box, Elias's father's voice commanding death. It all came rushing back like a storm behind her ribs. Elias stood at the edge of the rocks, his silhouette stark against the pale horizon. He hadn't slept either. The rising sun caught in the scar over his brow, turning it into a line of fire. He looked like a man carved from the desert itself, ancient, unbroken, but bleeding from inside. Emily rose, brushing the sand from her jacket. Her voice was soft when she spoke. "You really think Marcus meant it? The orphanage, Elias didn't turn. He never said things he didn't mean, especially not at the end." Emily walked up beside him, following his gaze toward the horizon. "Where is it?" "Southern Nevada," he said. "Outside a town called Coldwater. He bought it in the 80s, turned it into a charitable academy, my father's first shell foundation. On paper, it fed and housed hundreds of abandoned children. In reality, it was a recruitment ground, a place to mold loyalty and test obedience." Emily's jaw tightened. He used kids to build his empire. Elias nodded once, his voice flat. The first generation of his employees came from there. He called them his chosen ones. The words made Emily's stomach turn, and Marcus hid the ledger there. She said quietly, "If anyone could find a place his father would never look." Elias said, "It was him." Emily stared out at the horizon. The light was spreading now, spilling over the sand in a flood of gold. "Then that's where we start." They drove for hours, the world shifting from barren desert to cracked roads and forgotten towns. Emily stayed silent most of the way, staring out the window, her reflection merging with the endless landscape. Her thoughts were a storm: Lily's face, the black box, Marcus's final message echoing through her mind. Every mile brought her closer to the truth, and to danger. Elias drove with both hands steady on the wheel, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. The road stretched straight ahead, a narrow line between fate and oblivion. After a long silence, Emily finally spoke. "You never talk about your brother." Elias's hands flexed slightly on the wheel. "There's not much left to say. You grew up together, not exactly. Marcus was 10 years older. By the time I was born, he was already being groomed. I didn't really know him until I was 12. He taught me things quietly, things my father would have called weakness: empathy, guilt, doubt. Emily glanced at him, "So he tried to save you." Elias gave a humorless smile. "No. He tried to remind me I was human." The weight in his voice told her that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped believing it. They passed through the skeleton of a once lively town, rusted signs, boarded windows, a diner leaning sideways against the wind. The painted letters on the wall still read Coldwater Junction. Elias slowed the car, eyes scanning the horizon. "This is it." The orphanage sat about 2 miles beyond town, an old brick compound, sun, bleached and crumbling halves, wallowed by the desert. A faded sign still clung to its gate, "The Hale Foundation for Children." Emily stared at it through the windshield. Even from here, the place felt wrong, not abandoned, but watchful. The windows were dark, reflective, like eyes that still remembered everything. Elias parked behind a rusted bus frame and cut the engine. The silence was deafening. He turned to her. "Once we go in, there's no pretending anymore. Whatever Marcus hid there, it's what got him killed." Emily met his gaze. "Then we find it, and we end this." They crossed the broken gate and stepped inside. The air was still, thick with the smell of dust and old wood. Every footstep echoed like a memory refusing to die. Inside, the main hall stretched long and hollow. Faded murals covered the walls, children's drawings of angels and suns, smiling faces now warped and cracked with age. Emily ran her hand along one of the murals. "It's like they wanted to paint over the pain," she whispered. Elias's voice was quiet behind her. "They were told to." She turned to him. "You were one of them, weren't you?" Elias's eyes flickered. a shadow crossing his face, for a while, until Marcus got me out. She wanted to ask more, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Whatever he had endured here didn't belong to words. They moved deeper into the building, through dormitories filled with decaying beds, through hallways lined with peeling photographs. In one room, a single metal chair sat under a bare bulb, rust staining the floor beneath it. Emily's voice broke the silence. "This place. It feels like it remembers." "It does," Elias said. "It remembers everything." He led her down a narrow staircase at the far end of the hall. The steps groaned under their weight, the air growing colder as they descended. At the bottom was a steel door, thick, reinforced, untouched by rust. Elias knelt beside it, brushing away sand from its frame. "Marcus told me once," he said slowly, "that every lie my father built had a truth buried underneath. This door, it's the truth." Emily shone her flashlight across the metal. A small keypad sat embedded in the wall beside it, dead from years of decay. She frowned. "Even if that worked, do you know the code?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the black box. He turned it over, running his fingers along the edges, then pressed a small latch hidden near its base. The cover clicked open slightly, revealing a second layer beneath. Inside was a small piece of folded paper. Emily's eyes widened. He hid something inside it. Elias unfolded the note carefully. The handwriting was shaky, faint from age. Marcus's voice, written in ink. "For Ellie, you'll find me where we began. The light always falls north." Elias exhaled sharply, his eyes glinting in the flashlight beam. "That's not just a message, it's a direction." Emily pointed toward the far wall. "North is that way." They turned together, the beam of light sweeping across the basement. Near the northern wall, behind an old filing cabinet, something caught the light, a small metal vent, sealed with screws. Elias moved quickly, pulling the crowbar from his pack. The metal screamed as he pried the vent open. Behind it was a narrow cavity lined with concrete, and inside, wrapped in cloth that had yellowed with age, lay a small leather-bound book. Emily's heart raced as Elias pulled it out. Dust rose into the air like breath after a long sleep. The ledger. He opened it, the pages brittle but legible, rows upon rows of transactions, names, account numbers, signatures. Emily's stomach twisted as she scanned the entries. Politicians, oil conglomerates, defense contractors, millions moved through false charities, all under the Hale Foundation's name. "This," she whispered, "this could burn governments." Elias nodded grimly. It was never about money, it was about control. He closed the book and looked at her, eyes hard. "Now you see why they killed him." Emily's voice shook, and why they took Lily. They both turned suddenly, a sound above them, the faintest echo of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floorboards overhead. Elias's hand went to his gun. "We're not alone." Emily's breath caught. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than any before, the kind that waits just before something happens. A shadow passed over the staircase, faint but unmistakable. Elias raised his weapon, his voice a whisper. "Stay behind me." The first creak of the stair followed, then another. Someone was coming down. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. She clutched the ledger against her chest. The beam of her flashlight shook as she aimed it toward the dark stairwell. The shape emerged, tall, slow, deliberate. A man. When light hit his face, Emily gasped. Elias froze, because standing there, framed in the doorway of the past, was a face they both knew, older, hollow-eyed, but unmistakably familiar. Marcus Vander Hale. As the dust settled around his shadow, Emily realized that in the desert, even the dead refused to stay buried, and the truth had finally come to claim them. For a moment, Emily couldn't move. The flashlight trembled in her hand, its beam shaking over the man's face as dust drifted in slow spirals through the air. His eyes caught the light, first hollow but alive, framed by deep lines carved from years of running and silence. Marcus Vander Hale stood at the bottom of the staircase, breathing hard, like someone who had walked out of the grave. Elias lowered his gun slowly, disbelief breaking through his hardened expression. His voice came out a whisper, fractured by years of memory. Marcus. The man's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but it was tired, haunted. Hello, little brother. The sound of his voice hit Elias like a blade. The weapon slipped from his grip, clattering to the floor. For a long moment he simply stared, as if his mind couldn't reconcile what his eyes saw. They said you were dead, he murmured. Marcus stepped fully into the light. His once pristine features were worn down by time, hair streaked with gray, skin darkened by sun and exile, eyes that carried the weight of too many ghosts. They wanted you to believe that, he said. It was safer that way. Emily felt her heart pounding in her chest. You survived the crash, she whispered. Marcus's gaze shifted to her. Barely. The explosion threw me clear. I don't remember the impact, just the silence afterward, sand in my mouth, fire behind me. I crawled until the world disappeared. He paused, the weight of memory dragging his voice lower. I stayed hidden, watching, waiting, until someone disturbed the grave. Emily realized he meant her. I didn't mean to, she said softly. I found the jet by accident. Marcus looked at her with something between gratitude and pity. No one finds anything in that desert by accident. Elias stepped forward, his voice breaking through the thick air. Why didn't you tell me? Why let me believe you were dead? Marcus's eyes softened, full of regret. Because you had to live. If they knew you were alive, they would have used you against me or killed you outright. I couldn't let my father take you too. Elias's jaw clenched. He tried anyway. Marcus nodded once. He never stopped trying. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The only sound was the faint hum of the desert wind sneaking through the cracks above them, whispering through the hollow building like a dying hymn. Finally, Emily spoke. You hid the ledger. Marcus turned to her, his gaze sharpening. And you found it. She held it up slightly, the old leather book trembling in her hands. We came here because of your message. The black box, it led us to this place. Marcus's eyes flicked to Elias. You listened. Elias nodded. All of it, including his voice. Marcus's expression darkened. Then you know. Elias's tone hardened. He killed you. Marcus's gaze drifted toward the cracked ceiling, the light from Emily's flashlight glinting off the dust around him. He killed everything. He didn't need me dead, he just needed the truth buried. So he buried me with it. Emily stepped closer. Your father's still alive, isn't he? Marcus's eyes found hers again, sharp now, alive with purpose, alive and untouchable. He built his empire on blood and charity, and the world called him a savior. But everything that shines has shadows. MS, Carter, and my father is what hides in them. Elias swallowed hard, the child in him surfacing for the first time. He's still watching, isn't he, even now? Marcus nodded. Always. He built an army of loyalty and silence. That's why the truth has to come from outside the family. That's why I needed her. Emily frowned. Me? You found what no one else could. Marcus said, you touched the wreck, opened the lockers, took the first piece. That made you a threat, but it also made you free. You don't carry our blood. You can't be bought by it. She shook her head, emotion welling up. I didn't ask for any of this. They took my daughter, Marcus. They took my child. His eyes softened, pain flickering through the steel of his stare. Then you have more reason than anyone to finish this. Your daughter is leverage. They'll use her to stop you from revealing what's in that ledger. Emily's voice trembled. I can't stop, not now. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then listen to me carefully. You can't fight him head on. You expose him, but you make sure the world is watching first. Once the ledger's out, he'll burn everything to erase it and you." Elias stepped forward, his tone low, urgent. "How do we do that? How do we make it public when everyone he owns controls the story?" Marcus's gaze was steady. "You use his own network. His foundation still funnels money through dozens of charities, media outlets, universities, health organizations. Every one of them owes their existence to his donations." "That's where you plant it." Emily frowned. "Plant it? Evidence," Marcus said. "We leak parts of the ledger through channels that look legitimate: journalists, watchdog groups, international investigators. Not all at once. Drip, feed it, make the machine turn on itself before he can stop it." Elias's expression hardened. "And while we do that, he'll come for us." Marcus's eyes flicked to the stairs. "He already has." As if summoned by his words, a loud crack split the silence. The sound of a door slamming upstairs, then voices. Men's voices. Heavy footsteps. Emily froze. Elias drew his gun, motioning for her to back away from the open space. Marcus stayed calm, his face unreadable, but his eyes burned with urgency. "They found me," he said quietly. "They followed you here." Elias's voice was sharp. "How many?" "Enough." Emily clutched the ledger tight against her chest. "We have to get out." Marcus nodded. "There's a tunnel in the West Wing basement. I built it after the orphanage closed. It leads to the drainage canal half a mile out." Elias gestured toward the stairs. "Go, I'll cover you." Marcus's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. "No, if you stay, they'll kill you first." "We go together." Another crash above, closer this time. Dust fell from the ceiling. The walls trembled with the sound of boots. Emily looked between them, panic rising. "They're here." Elias grabbed her hand. "Move." They ran through the corridor, Marcus leading with surprising strength for a man who had spent 20 years as a ghost. The hallway curved sharply into a smaller room, its walls lined with crumbling cabinets. Marcus stopped near a broken desk, pulled aside a faded rug, and revealed a trapdoor. Beneath it, "Go." He hissed. Emily climbed down first, her feet hitting the cold metal ladder. The air below was damp, stale, the scent of time and secrecy. Elias followed, the ledger tucked inside his jacket. As Marcus prepared to descend, the door behind him burst open. Men flooded in dark suits, rifles. Flashlights cutting through the dim, one shouted, "On the ground." Marcus looked down at his brother, his expression calm. "Keep her safe, Marcus." Elias reached up, but Marcus slammed the trapdoor shut, the heavy lock clicking into place. Gunfire erupted above. Emily screamed. Elias grabbed her arm. "Run." They sprinted through the tunnel, the narrow space echoing with every breath, every footstep. The sound of gunfire above faded, replaced by the low roar of approaching engines outside the compound. The tunnel opened into a cracked drainage pipe, leading into the open desert. They stumbled out. Beneath the setting sun, panting, covered in dust, Elias turned back toward the orphanage. Smoke began to rise from its roof, black against the crimson sky. "Marcus," Emily whispered. Elias's voice was barely audible. He knew what he was doing. Emily looked at him, tears mixing with the dirt on her face. "He stayed behind so we could run." Elias's eyes hardened, wet with rage. "No, he stayed behind to end it his way." The orphanage burned brighter, flames swallowing its sins, its history, its ghosts. The fire climbed high into the sky, lighting the desert like a signal. Emily stood there, staring, her heart breaking beneath the weight of loss and revelation. The man who had faked his death twice was finally gone, but his truth lived on in her hands and in the blood of the brother beside her. Elias turned to her, his voice low, steady. "We move tonight. We find a way to finish this, for Marcus, for Lily." Emily nodded, gripping the ledger close. The wind rose around them, carrying embers into the night sky, burning fragments of the past, finally set free. As the orphanage collapsed into flame behind them, the desert carried their footsteps onward, two survivors bound by loss, carrying the final piece of a story that refused to stay buried. The wind screamed across the dunes that night, a living thing, wild and relentless. The fire that had devoured the orphanage still burned on the horizon, painting the desert in violent hues of gold and crimson. From a distance, it looked almost beautiful. Up close, it was the death of a secret and the birth of a war. Emily Carter and Elias Vander Hale stood beside their vehicle, silhouettes framed by the glow of the blaze. Neither spoke. The heat pressed against their faces, the crackle of fire swallowing the silence between them. Finally, Emily whispered, her voice raw and trembling, "He didn't have to die." Elias didn't look at her. His jaw was tight, his eyes locked on the burning compound. He chose it. She swallowed the rising ache in her chest. "You think that helps?" "It has to." The wind shifted, sending a cloud of ash sweeping across the sand. Elias turned away from the fire, the light fading from his eyes. "We don't have time to mourn. If those men were my father's, more are coming. They'll track us. They'll expect us to run." Emily looked at him, her voice low but fierce. "Then we don't run." He met her gaze. "What are you saying?" She held up the ledger, the small, weathered book, glowing faintly in the firelight. "We take this to them before they can come to us. We finish what Marcus started." Elias's expression hardened. "You're talking about going on the offensive. I'm talking about ending it." Elias studied her for a long moment. There was no fear left in her voice, only resolve, cold and sharp. Finally, he nodded once. "Then we'll need the rest of what's buried in that jet." Emily frowned. "The lockers." He nodded. "The jewels, every last one of them. Marcus designed this to be his insurance, a way to buy survival, buy silence, or buy truth. Those gems are our leverage now, our weapon." She took a slow breath. "Then we go back to where it all started." Elias gave a grim smile. "The desert has one more secret to give." By dawn, the fire behind them had burned itself to smoke. The sky was pale blue now, the color of bone. They drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound that dared exist between them. Emily's hands gripped the wheel tightly, the ledger resting on her lap like a sacred burden. Elias watched the horizon, scanning for movement. "We'll have maybe an hour before the satellites sweep this zone again," he said. "After that, they'll know we're back." Emily nodded. "Then we make it count." The desert stretched endlessly before them, shimmering with heat and silence. The wreck appeared slowly silver and haunting against the dunes. It looked different now, like something aware of its own resurrection. Emily parked a distance away. They sat there for a moment, neither moving. Elias finally spoke. "You don't have to go inside this time." Emily turned to him, her voice steady. "Yes, I do." They approached the jet together, their boots sinking into soft sand. The wind carried the faint metallic scent of decay and time. The broken fuselage gleamed faintly under the morning sun, like a wound that refused to close. Inside, the air was still heavy with memory. The dust they'd disturbed days before had settled again, as though the plane had tried to heal itself. But this time there was no awe in Emily's gaze, only purpose. They moved methodically, Elias prying open each compartment, Emily gathering what he uncovered. The jewels spilled out like captured light, hundreds of them, diamonds, rubies, sapphires, each one a silent witness to greed and blood. Emily's breath trembled. "It's enough to buy a country." Elias's voice was quiet. "It already did." She paused, holding a sapphire up to the light. It glimmered cold and perfect. "We can't just take it all," she said. "We can't carry this much." Elias shook his head. "We're not taking it. We're moving it." Emily looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the rear cargo bay, where a set of old containers sat half buried in sand. "There's an airfield 10 miles north. still functional enough for a small transport. We'll load these there and make sure they go somewhere they can't be silenced." Emily's eyes narrowed. "And where is that?" Elias met her gaze. "Marcus's backup. He had a contact in Geneva, an investigative collective that's been hunting global laundering networks for decades. If we can get the jewels and the ledger to them, we make this public." Her pulse quickened. "You mean leak everything, not leak?" Elias said. "Flood. We drown them in the truth." Before she could answer, a faint sound echoed from outside, the crunch of sand beneath tires. Elias froze. Emily turned toward the window. In the distance, two black dots moved across the dunes, growing larger by the second. "They found us," she breathed. Elias grabbed the crowbar and slammed the compartment shut. "We're out of time." They rushed toward the cockpit. Through the fractured glass, Emily could see the SUV cresting the ridge. Dust billowed behind them like smoke. Elias scanned the horizon. "We can't outdrive them on sand." Emily's eyes darted around the cabin, her thoughts racing. "Then we make the desert fight for us." He looked at her sharply. "What? The storm?" she said, her voice rising with urgency. "There's one coming. You said the satellites track this zone every hour. If the storm hits before they find us, they'll lose visual." Elias's eyes flicked to the horizon. The sky was shifting, a faint orange haze forming far to the west. He nodded. "We need time for it to reach us. Then we stall them." Elias smirked faintly, the ghost of Marcus's defiance flashing across his face. "You've got more fire than I expected." Emily's jaw tightened. "You haven't seen anything yet." They scrambled back outside, moving quickly to the rear of the wreck. Elias found what was left of an old supply crate, flares, wire, a few half-buried fuel canisters. "We can rig a distraction," he said. "Light the sand on fire, draw them toward the wreck. And then," Elias's eyes gleamed, "then we vanish." The first SUV reached the base of the ridge as Emily struck the flare. The red light flared against the sky, casting her face in hellish glow. She threw it toward the canisters. A heartbeat later, the desert exploded. The sound was deafening, fire roaring, wind screaming. Sand shot into the air in waves. The SUV skidded, their tires spinning, drivers shouting commands into radios that would soon fail. Elias grabbed Emily's hand. "Go." They ran, half-blind in the smoke and fire. The heat seared their lungs, but the chaos behind them drowned the sound of their footsteps. By the time they reached the ridge, the storm was closer, a wall of orange and gray devouring the horizon. The air howled with static, the sand whipping like shards of glass. Emily glanced back once. Through the haze, the wreck was barely visible, flames curling over its wings like broken feathers. "The jewels," she gasped. "They'll burn," Elias said, pulling her onward. "But that's fine. The fire will tell them nothing. The truth isn't in what they can buy, it's in what we carry." He tapped the pack slung across his shoulder, the ledger and the black box, both sealed tight. They stumbled into the storm just as the wind swallowed the last of the light. Sand whipped across their faces, stinging like claws. Emily could barely see him now, his outline fading in the whirlwind. "Elias," she shouted. His voice came faint, torn by the wind. "Keep moving. The storm will cover us." The world became sound and motion, roaring wind, slicing sand, fire behind them fading into distance. The desert screamed, devouring the trail they'd left, erasing every footprint. Emily pressed forward through the chaos, her hands shielding her face. Somewhere ahead, she could still hear Elias calling. Somewhere behind, the men shouted, lost, blind, swallowed by the storm. The sky turned black, the air turned alive, and through it all, Emily Carter moved forward, driven not by fear now, but by purpose. The desert was no longer her prison, it was her ally. As the storm howled across the Mojave, burying fire and footprints alike, The truth itself went to ground, waiting for the world that had built this lie to come searching for it. The desert storm raged for hours, a living tempest that stripped the land of sound and shape. Sand moved like water, swallowing the sky, erasing everything. Emily Carter couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, each one filled with dust. Her scarf was soaked with sweat and grit. Somewhere in the chaos, she could still hear Elias shouting her name, faint but constant, the only anchor in a world turned blind. Emily, this way. She pushed toward his voice, stumbling over uneven ground. The storm roared like a freight train around her, the wind sharp enough to sting her skin. The world was all motion, orange, gray, and fury. Then she saw him, a shadow against the shifting sand, crouched beside a half-buried rock formation. His arm waved her down. She dropped beside him, her body shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. He pulled a tarp over them both, shielding their faces from the wind. For a few moments, they just breathed the sound of air rasping through fabric, the muffled thunder of the storm above. Elias wiped grit from his eyes, his voice rough. "You okay?" Emily nodded weakly, spitting sand from her mouth. I can't feel my face." He managed a faint grin. "That's a good sign, means it's still attached." She gave a breathless laugh that turned into a cough. Beneath the tarp, the light was dim and amber, flickering as the storm shifted above them. "How long will it last?" she asked. "Could be hours," he said. "Maybe all day. But it's our cover. Nobody's tracking anything in this." Emily leaned back against the stone, closing her eyes. The exhaustion in her bones felt bottomless. "We lost everything," she whispered. "The plane. The jewels, Marcus." Elias's voice softened. "Not everything." She looked at him. His hand rested on the small pack between them, the one that held the black box and the ledger. The last proof of the truth they'd risked everything to find. "That's all that matters now," he said. "The rest was just wait." Emily stared at the bag for a long moment, then at him. "When this storm passes, they'll still be out there. Your father's men, the Foundation, they won't stop." Elias's jaw tightened. "Then neither do we." They sat in silence, the storm's roar their only companion. It felt endless, a purging wind washing the earth clean of everything false. When it finally began to fade, hours later, the light returned in fragments. The wind softened to a whisper. The world that emerged was unrecognizable. Dunes had shifted, the wreck buried entirely beneath the sand. The fire was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Emily pushed the tarp aside and climbed to her feet. The horizon stretched pale and quiet, the sun fighting through thin clouds of dust. Everything the world had hidden was hidden again. She looked down at Elias. Where now? He scanned the distance, the faint outline of mountains far to the east. The airfield. It's our only way out before they regroup. She nodded, tightening her scarf. The two began to walk, the sand crunching softly under their boots. The silence between them felt different now, not empty, but deliberate, like an understanding shared between survivors. Every few steps, Emily glanced at the pack. The ledger's presence seemed to pulse through the canvas, as if the truth itself was alive inside it, waiting to be unleashed. By afternoon, they reached what remained of the airfield. It was nothing more than a stretch of cracked concrete surrounded by rusted hangars, a forgotten place from a forgotten war. The wind whistled through broken doors, carrying the faint metallic hum of memory. Elias approached the hangar cautiously, gun drawn. Emily followed, her steps silent, her eyes scanning the open desert behind them. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every reflection of sunlight on metal made her heart leap. Inside, the hangar smelled of oil and decay. An old twin-engine cargo plane sat in the center, half covered by tarp. Its paint was peeled, its wings dusted in sand. Elias's lips curved in a faint smile. Marcus always had a backup plan. He climbed onto the wing, pulling the tarp back. This was his escape route, smuggler's plane, pre-fitted for long-range fuel, old but it'll fly. Emily stared at the rusting hulk. You're sure? Sure enough. He jumped down and started checking the engine. Emily wandered through the hangar, her eyes catching on remnants of another life, empty crates, faded maps, rusted tools. Everything here felt like an echo of Marcus's unfinished plan. She found a workbench in the corner, covered with old papers, and a dusty radio transmitter. She brushed the dirt away, curiosity flickering in her tired eyes. The power cable was still connected to a generator. Elias, she called softly, this thing still works. He walked over, frowning. Maybe. Why? If we send a signal, not to them, but to someone else, someone who can publish. Elias's brow furrowed. You mean broadcast the ledger? Emily nodded. If Marcus's contact in Geneva was real, we can send encrypted data directly. You said he trusted them. Elias hesitated. We don't know who's listening. She looked at him, her expression fierce. Then we make sure everyone is. He met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd met him, Elias smiled not bitterly, but with a spark of something like belief. All right, he said. Let's do it. The sun began to sink as they worked. Elias fueled the plane while Emily pieced together the transmitter's circuits. The generator coughed, then growled to life, humming through the still air. The radio crackled faintly. Emily sat at the console, typing commands into the small interface. Lines of code flickered across the dusty screen. Signals weak, she muttered, but it's enough for a burst transmission. Elias stood behind her, watching the desert through the open hangar doors. Make it fast. Once this hits the airwaves, they'll trace it. She nodded. Then we make sure it hits everywhere at once. She connected the drive containing the scanned pages of the ledger. The machine whined as the upload began. Progress bar, 12%, 27%, 54%. Then a noise outside. Elias's head snapped up. Engines, distant, but closing. Emily, he said quietly, they're coming. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. I just need 2 more minutes. He grabbed his rifle, moving toward the door. Dust plumed across the horizon. 3 vehicles, dark and fast, cutting straight toward them. Emily, now. 80%, she shouted. Sweat trickled down her face. Bullets ripped through the metal siding of the hangar, sparks flying. Emily ducked instinctively. Elias returned fire, his shots echoing like thunder. 95. She yelled. The computer beeped. Upload complete. A line of text blinked across the screen. Data stream secured, relay active. Emily slammed the transmitter shut and yanked the power cord. It's done. Elias grabbed her arm. Move. They sprinted toward the plane as more bullets shredded the hangar walls. Elias fired back, covering her as she climbed into the cockpit. He leapt in after her, slamming the hatch shut. Can this thing even fly? Emily shouted, strapping in. Elias smirked, flipping switches. We're about to find out. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life with a deafening growl. The hangar filled with smoke and wind. The SUV crashed through the open doors just as the plane lurched forward. Bullets hammered the fuselage. Emily screamed, gripping the dashboard. Elias. Hold on. The tires skidded across the cracked runway. The wind howled. The engines strained. For a moment, it seemed the plane would never lift, and then it did. The desert dropped away beneath them. Bullets traced the air behind them like silver rain, then faded as the ground fell away. Emily looked down, her heart pounding. The horizon stretched endless and gold beneath the setting sun. The world below the lies, the greed, the empire of her enemies was growing smaller. Elias steadied the controls, his knuckles white. You did it, he said. You got it out. Emily leaned back in her seat, staring at the endless sky. No, she whispered, Marcus did. The desert below glowed like an ocean of fire as the last light of day bled into night. The storm was gone, the wreck was gone, but the truth was airborne, unstoppable now. As the old cargo plane cut through the sky toward freedom, the desert below began to bury its sins once more, but this time the world would hear them screaming through the airwaves. The engines roared steady and low, a heartbeat against the wind. The desert stretched endlessly below, glowing faintly beneath the first light of dawn. The storm had passed. The world was calm again, but the silence was deceptive. Emily Carter sat in the co-pilot's seat, her hands trembling slightly as she stared out the window. The horizon burned with muted gold, and beneath it, she knew, the truth they had unleashed was beginning to move. Elias sat beside her, focused, hands gripping the controls with the calm precision of a man who'd forgotten how to panic. The plane vibrated softly around them, an old beast defying age and gravity. In the back, the black box and ledger sat secured in a metal case, their existence now transmitted to the world. "You think they got it?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and fear. Elias didn't look away from the horizon. "They got it. The transmission was clean. Geneva will have the files by now." She nodded, though her heart refused to calm. "Then it's over." Elias's eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. "No, Emily, it's just begun." She turned to him, frowning. "What do you mean the data's out? The world will see what your father did." He shook his head slowly. "The world doesn't see. It chooses what to believe, and my father's had 20 years to prepare for this." Emily's stomach tightened. "You're saying he already knows?" Elias's expression hardened. "He's known since the first transmission hit the air. By now he'll have agents intercepting the fallout. He'll twist it, call it fake, an attack, a smear campaign. Money buys silence, but fear buys loyalty. He has both." Emily looked away, the morning light catching the side of her face. The faint reflection of the sky danced across her eyes, like a memory of something she'd once hoped for. "Then, what did we risk everything for?" Elias didn't answer immediately. His voice came low, almost reverent. "For the truth to exist. That's the only thing. He can't erase the fact that it's out there. Someone will see it. Someone will believe it. It just needs time to grow." Emily leaned back, exhaling. The hum of the plane filled the silence again, constant and heavy. She watched the desert below fade into mountains vast, ancient, unmoved. Her thoughts drifted to Lily, her little girl's laughter echoing through their small trailer, the way she'd grip her mother's hand before bed, whispering dreams that belonged to a safer world. Emily closed her eyes, whispering to the silence, "Hold on, baby. I'm coming for you." Elias's voice broke her trance. "We're low on fuel. The storm burned more than I expected. We'll have to set down soon." She turned tense. "Where?" He glanced at the map clipped to the console. "There's an abandoned freight station, not far from the Colorado border. If we can reach it, we can refuel, maybe regroup." "Maybe," he gave a dry smile. "I've learned to stop promising things in this life." An hour later, the sun was higher, harsh and relentless. The plane cut through the bright air, leaving a faint trail that shimmered in the heat. Emily's nerves refused to quiet. Every hum, every shift of metal felt like a warning. Elias leaned forward, squinting through the glare. "There." She followed his gaze, a small cluster of structures rising from the desert floor, rusted and skeletal. The freight station, once a hub of movement, now nothing more than bones in the sand. As they descended, the wind caught the wings, rattling the frame. Emily gripped the seat tightly. Plane groaned under the strain, wheels striking the cracked concrete runway with a jolt that made her teeth clench. Dust exploded around them. When the engines finally died, the silence felt too loud. Emily sat for a moment, unable to move. Her heart pounded, the adrenaline refusing to fade. Elias unbuckled and stood. "We'll check for supplies first, then we'll see what's next." Emily followed him out into the dry air. The heat hit her like a wall. The smell of fuel, rust, and sand filled her lungs. The freight yard stretched around them, endless rails that led nowhere, half-buried trains sleeping beneath the dunes. They walked in silence, weapons drawn, scanning movement. The stillness here was wrong, not peaceful, but expectant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elias stopped near an old maintenance shed. Fuel drums, he said, pointing, might still have something. He began checking the lids while Emily scanned the horizon. The air shimmered. The sun beat down mercilessly. For a moment, it almost felt safe, then the faint buzz of static cut through the air. Emily frowned. "You hear that?" Elias froze, head tilting slightly. The sound grew faint at first, then clearer. A radio transmission. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small portable receiver they'd salvaged. The signal hissed, then a voice came through, clipped, distant, mechanical. "Targets confirmed." Plane landed near Coldwater Freight Station. "Retrieve the woman alive." Orders from Hale Sr. himself. Emily's blood went cold. "He knows where we are." Elias's expression darkened. "He's watching everything." She grabbed his arm. "We have to move, now." He nodded. "Grab what you can. We won't have another chance." They ran back to the plane, the sand crunching beneath their boots. Inside, Elias grabbed the pack, the ledger, the black box, and Marcus's note. Emily checked her pistol, loaded the last of her rounds. She glanced toward the horizon again. Movement. Dust. 3 vehicles cutting across the flatlands, engines roaring faintly through the heat. "They're here," she breathed. Elias's tone dropped. "All calm gone. We can't fight them head on. We use the terrain. The canyons east of here are narrow, good for losing pursuit." Emily hesitated, looking at the plane. "We can't leave it." Elias gave her a look that silenced argument. "The plane's done its part, we won't." He grabbed a flare from the emergency kit and tossed it into the cockpit. The red fire hissed and spread instantly, climbing the walls of the cabin. Emily stared, startled. Elias, he looked back at her once, eyes like steel. "If they want ghosts, let's give them one." The plane erupted in flame, smoke curling into the bright sky. They turned and ran, sprinting toward the eastern ridge. The desert wind whipped the fire behind them, sending smoke rising like a false signal. By the time the SUV arrived minutes later, the plane was an inferno. The men surrounded it, weapons drawn, scanning the dunes for signs of life. But Emily and Elias were already gone, swallowed by the canyons, their footprints erased by wind. They didn't stop running until the sun began to dip again. The canyon walls glowed red and gold, the air cooler here, echoing with their breath. Finally they collapsed behind a ridge, lungs burning. Emily leaned against the rock, gasping. "He's everywhere. It's like he's inside the air itself." Elias sat beside her, sweat streaking his dirt-covered face. "He built the air, Emily. Every system, every network, it all feeds him. You can't hide from something that lives inside what you breathe." She looked at him, her eyes fierce. "Then we stop hiding. We make him choke on it." He turned to her, a flicker of something, pride, maybe passing through his face. "You sound like Marcus." She smiled faintly. "I'll take that as a compliment." The wind moved through the canyon, whispering like a voice older than either of them. Elias stared at the horizon. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. "The ledger's out there now. The truth is moving. But to make it matter, we need proof of what's next. The people still moving the money. The machine doesn't stop because the driver dies." Emily frowned. "And where do we find that?" He looked at her. "In gold?" She blinked. "Gold?" Elias nodded slowly. "My father's final project, the Aurum Initiative, a global shell network. Everything dirty he ever touched got funneled through it. Marcus tried to trace it once. Said it was built to last longer than his life." Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then we burn it down." Elias stood, adjusting the strap on his pack. "To do that, We'll need to follow the money to its heart. And where's that? He looked toward the horizon, the last light glinting in his eyes. Zurich. Emily stared at him. Switzerland, you mean we? Yes, Elias said, cutting her off. We take the truth where it began, to the center of the system my father built. That's where we end him. The desert wind carried their silence for a long time. Above them, the stars began to appear one by one, sharp and bright. Emily finally whispered, "Then let's finish what Marcus started." Elias nodded once. The firelight of the setting sun washed over them both, turning their silhouettes into gold against the fading desert. As night fell across the dunes, the truth that had been buried for decades began to rise, and for the first time, the world's most powerful man was about to feel the weight of his own empire crumble beneath him. The desert night was alive with whispers of heat fading, of secrets unraveling, of war quietly shifting beneath the stars. Emily Carter and Elias Vander Hale sat by a dying campfire at the base of the canyon, its embers pulsing like the heartbeat of something unfinished. Above them, the sky stretched wide and merciless, littered with stars that looked too far away to care. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence between them was no longer fear, it was focus, calculation, quiet determination forged by loss. Finally, Emily broke. "It's Zurich," she said softly. The word felt heavy, final. "You're serious?" Elias nodded, the flicker of flame reflecting in his eyes. "The Aurum Initiative. Every coin, every transaction that built the foundation of my father's empire runs through there. Banks, trusts, shells. It's the bloodstream of his power." She frowned. "So we follow the money." "We follow the money," he echoed. Emily stared into the fire. "And when we find it," Elias's voice was low, steady, almost hollow, "then we kill it." She looked up sharply. "You mean, expose it?" He met her gaze. "I mean end it, permanently." There was no emotion in his tone, just certainty, the kind that comes from a man who's lived too long with ghosts. Emily leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "You're talking about destroying billions in assets, taking down a network that touches governments. Do you even realize what happens if we do that?" Elias's mouth twitched, not in amusement, but exhaustion. "Yes, everything breaks, the markets, the illusion of stability, the power his name still commands. That's the point." Her voice rose slightly. "And what about the innocent people caught in the crossfire? The workers, the families tied to those corporations, they'll lose everything." He turned toward her, his eyes sharp, cutting. "You think they don't already lose everything, Emily? Every time someone like him launders blood into gold, every time greed buys another silence, you think the system will ever fix itself?" She stared at him, torn between fury and understanding. "And what are we, then?" "Justice." He shook his head. "No, we're the reckoning." The fire popped between them, sparks rising like fleeting stars. Emily exhaled slowly, eyes glistening. Marcus wanted the truth to come out, but he didn't want more blood. Elias looked away. Marcus didn't live long enough to understand that truth alone isn't enough. People forget it, bury it, rewrite it. "And you?" she asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "I don't plan on being forgotten." The words hung between them, heavy and unyielding. By morning, the horizon had turned gray, blue. The wind was gentle again, but the air felt charged like the calm before another storm. Emily packed the few supplies they had left, while Elias scanned the skyline through an old pair of binoculars. "Convoy," he muttered. "Southwest Ridge. 2 trucks, maybe 3 miles out." Emily's stomach tightened. His men, maybe, or mercenaries. Either way, they're closing in. She zipped the pack and slung it over her shoulder. "Then we move." Elias pointed toward the canyon trail. "We'll cut east. There's a small airstrip on the other side of the border. I know a pilot who owes me favors." "Another ghost from your past," she said, half smiling, his mouth curved faintly. "A ghost with wings." They started climbing the canyon path, boots scraping against rock. The morning light spilled over the peaks, illuminating the endless expanse of sand and shadow behind them. For the first time, Emily could see how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Halfway up, she stopped. Looking back at the horizon, the freight yard was barely visible now, just a smear of smoke against the pale sky. Somewhere beneath that smoke, the wreck of their old plane lay in ashes, another piece of the puzzle burned away. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "if we're becoming the thing we're trying to destroy?" Elias turned, squinting against the light. "You mean like him?" She nodded. "You talk about ending the system, but at what cost? Marcus believed the truth would fix it. You believe fire will." Elias climbed a few steps higher, pausing. "Truth didn't save Marcus. Fire might." Emily's voice softened. "But fire destroys everything, even what's worth saving." He stared at her for a long time before answering. "Maybe that's the only way to rebuild." They reached the top of the ridge just as the wind picked up again. The desert stretched out in golden silence, vast, deceptive, alive. Below, the dust trails of the convoy grew closer. Elias crouched low, pulling his rifle from his shoulder. "They'll expect us to keep running east," he said. "So we go north instead through the Badlands. Harder terrain, but they'll lose sight." Emily nodded, wiping sweat from her brow, and after that, he glanced toward the horizon. "After that, we fly." By midday, the sun was brutal again. They crossed jagged stone fields and shallow ravines, their water running low, their shadows short. The world had shrunk to the rhythm of breath and footsteps, every sound amplified by the heat. When they finally reached the airstrip, it felt like stumbling upon the remains of a dream. A single hangar stood at the edge of a cracked runway, surrounded by rusted fuel tanks and weeds. Inside, under layers of dust and tarp, rested a twin-prop cargo plane smaller than the last one, but solid. Elias walked to the tail, brushing the dust away to reveal faded letters, S. Gray Cargo Operations. He smiled faintly. "He's real, then." "Who?" "Samuel Gray," Elias said. "Ex-military pilot. Marcus helped him disappear after a job went bad. He owes the family a debt." Emily looked around. "So where is he?" As if on cue, a voice called from the shadows. "Standing behind you, wondering why you're touching his plane." "They'll expect us to keep running east," he said. "So we go north instead through the Badlands. Harder terrain, but they'll lose sight." Emily nodded, wiping sweat from her brow, and after that, he glanced toward the horizon. "After that, we fly." By midday, the sun was brutal again. They crossed jagged stone fields and shallow ravines, their water running low, their shadows short. The world had shrunk to the rhythm of breath and footsteps, every sound amplified by the heat. When they finally reached the airstrip, it felt like stumbling upon the remains of a dream. A single hangar stood at the edge of a cracked runway, surrounded by rusted fuel tanks and weeds. Inside, under layers of dust and tarp, rested a twin-prop cargo plane smaller than the last one, but solid. Elias walked to the tail, brushing the dust away to reveal faded letters, S. Gray Cargo Operations. He smiled faintly. "He's real, then." "Who?" "Samuel Gray," Elias said. "Ex-military pilot. Marcus helped him disappear after a job went bad. He owes the family a debt." Emily looked around. "So where is he?" As if on cue, a voice called from the shadows. "Standing behind you, wondering why you're touching his plane." Emily spun, gun half raised. A man stepped into the light, tall, broad, face weathered by time and dust. His gray hair was tied back loosely, his eyes steady and unreadable. He wore a leather jacket that looked older than the airstrip itself. "Elias Vander Hale," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You look exactly like your brother, just angrier." Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I need a flight." Gray chuckled, shaking his head. "You always need a flight." Emily stepped forward. "We can pay, not in cash, in information." Gray raised an eyebrow. That's so. Elias tossed him the small metal case. Gray caught it, his expression darkening as he read the etched letters on the side. CVR cockpit voice recorder. He looked up sharply. You have no idea what kind of hell this thing brings with it. Elias's voice was calm, almost cold. Then you'll understand why we need to get it as far from hell as possible. Gray stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. You're still your brother's shadow, aren't you, always chasing ghosts? Elias didn't answer. Gray glanced at Emily. And you? She held his gaze. I'm just done being afraid. The old pilot studied them both, then turned toward the plane. Fine. But this thing's not ready for long flight. I'll need an hour to check the engines. Elias nodded. You've got 30 minutes. Gray smirked. Still impatient, I see. He disappeared toward the cockpit. Emily turned to Elias. What if he betrays us? Elias checked his weapon, eyes scanning the perimeter. Then he dies before we do. She didn't respond, but the cold certainty in his tone sent a chill down her spine. As the sun began to fall again, the engines sputtered to life. The sound filled the canyon like thunder. Gray stepped out, wiping grease from his hands. She'll fly, maybe not gracefully, but she'll fly. Elias nodded. Zurich. Gray gave him a long, searching look. You really want to fly into the lion's den? Elias's answer was simple. I built it. The pilot exhaled. Then you'd better hold on tight. Emily climbed aboard, her pulse racing. As the engines roared louder, the wind kicked up around the runway, swirling dust into the air. The world outside blurred into motion. The plane lifted off, rising above the endless expanse of desert. Emily looked down as the land fell away, the wrecks, the fire, the bones of greed swallowed by sand once more. She closed her eyes, whispering a single promise to the wind, for Lily, for Marcus. Elias sat beside her, staring out at the horizon. His reflection in the window looked older now, not from time, but from truth. Ahead, the sky darkened into twilight, and beyond it, the faint shimmer of distant lights, a city built on gold. Zurich. As the plane climbed into the gathering night, Emily felt the weight of everything they carried, the ledger, the proof, the memory of the dead. The truth was no longer buried. It was coming for the world, and the world was not ready for what it would cost. The plane cut through the clouds like a silver blade, streaking toward the heart of Europe. Below, the world glimmered in pieces, rivers coiling like molten glass, mountains glistening like teeth under the moonlight. To Emily Carter, it felt unreal. After days of running through sand, smoke, and storms, the sight of civilization looked almost like a trick of the mind. She sat by the window, staring down at the glittering sprawl that grew larger with every passing minute. Zurich, the city of vaults and veils, the place where lies were dressed in suits and buried beneath signatures. Elias sat across from her, the ledger open in his lap. Its pages fluttered slightly in the cabin's low hum. Numbers, names, codes, each one a brick in the empire his father had built and Marcus had died trying to destroy. Emily spoke without turning her head. How many lives are written in there? Elias's voice was quiet, almost hollow. Too many to count, but only one that matters now. She looked up. Your father's. He met her eyes. Ours. The words hung between them, heavy, final, charged with everything they had lost and everything they had left to lose. The pilot, Samuel Gray, called from the cockpit, his voice gravelly through the intercom. We'll hit Zurich airspace in 20. You sure you want to land this bird? It's not exactly welcome material. Elias rose, closing the ledger. We're not landing in Zurich. Emily frowned. Then where? There's an old industrial site south of the city. My father used to run shipments through there before the foundation went public. It's abandoned now, at least on paper. Emily's pulse quickened. You think he's there? Elias's gaze darkened. He doesn't run from fire, he waits inside it. She nodded slowly. Then we walk into the fire. He gave a faint, humorless smile. That's the only way to put it out. The descent began just before dawn. The sky was a pale bruise of blue and grey, and the Alps rose like sleeping giants beneath them. Fog clung to the ground in thick, rolling waves. As they touched down on the cracked tarmac of the abandoned airstrip, the plane's engines screamed, then faded into a whisper. Gray kept one hand on the throttle, his jaw tight. We're ghosts in friendly airspace, he muttered. I can give you 20 minutes, maybe less. After that, I'll have company. Elias nodded. That's all we need. He grabbed the pack, the ledger, the black box, Marcus's note, and slung it over his shoulder. Emily followed, her steps steady, her resolve sharper than fear. Outside, the air was cold and damp. The mist moved like breath over the ground. The industrial complex loomed ahead, concrete walls, shattered glass, and the faint echo of machines long dead. Emily pulled her jacket tighter. You're sure this is the place? Elias scanned the ruins. My father doesn't believe in coincidence. Every one of his ghosts has a purpose. They entered the main warehouse, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the vast emptiness. The air smelled of oil and rain. Old conveyor belts stretched into shadow, their surfaces coated in dust and time. Elias stopped near a large steel door, its edges marked by fresh tire tracks. He's been here, he said softly. Emily felt the chill crawl up her spine. So we're walking into a trap. Elias's eyes were cold. He's been setting it for 20 years, about time someone stepped in it. He placed his hand on the door and pushed. It creaked open with a groan, revealing a vast chamber beyond dark, humming faintly with unseen power. Rows of server racks glowed dimly in the gloom, blinking lights reflecting off polished metal floors. Emily's breath caught. This doesn't look abandoned. Elias's voice was low, reverent. This is the Aurum Core. She frowned. The what? The central hub of the initiative, he said. Everything my father ever built leads here: money, data, control. Every transaction that keeps the world asleep. Emily stepped closer to one of the glowing terminals. Streams of numbers flowed across the screens, shifting endlessly. It's still running. Elias nodded. He's here. Her hand trembled as she reached toward the glass. What happens if we shut it down? His expression hardened. The world wakes up. Before she could speak, a sound echoed through the chamber, slow, deliberate footsteps. Elias turned. The sound came from the far side of the room, from behind a wall of light. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, moving with the grace of someone who'd never been chased, never been touched by consequence. Harold Vander Hale. His hair was white now, but his eyes, cold and calculating, hadn't aged a day. He wore a dark suit that seemed out of place among the ruins, as if he'd brought civilization into the grave just to remind it who owned it. Elias, he said softly, his voice smooth as glass, you finally came home. Elias's hand went instinctively to his sidearm. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Harold smiled faintly. I've been waiting for you to stop running from your blood. His gaze shifted to Emily. And you must be the woman who thinks she can rewrite history. I've read your file, single mother, debt, a heart that still believes in good men. He chuckled. How beautifully naive. Emily's chest tightened, but her voice was steady. You killed your sons for this empire. Harold's eyes glimmered. Sons die, empires don't. Elias stepped forward, his voice sharp. You call this an empire? It's rot in a gold cage. Harold looked almost amused. Rot feeds the world, boy. Without it, there's no soil, no growth. You think you can burn the system and make something pure from its ashes. You're just me without the courage to admit what you are. Elias drew the gun. Then maybe I'll prove you wrong. Harold didn't flinch. You can't shoot what you need. Everything you touch, every cent, every file, every secret lives inside this network. You destroy me, you destroy it all, and then what? Chaos? Emily's voice cut through the tension, sharp and certain. Maybe that's the point. Harold turned to her slowly, his smile fading. Do you know what chaos looks like, MS Carter? It looks like your daughter starving, cold, lost in a world without order. Is that the truth you want? The mention of Lily struck like a blade. Emily's breath caught, her hands trembling. You don't speak her name. Harold tilted his head. But she's the only reason you're here, isn't she? I give meaning to your pain. Without me, you're just a mother with bad luck. Elias stepped between them, gun still raised. Enough, Harold sighed, almost pitying. You think you're heroes in a story that ended long ago. You don't understand, Elias. The system doesn't break. It adapts. You kill me, and someone else will wear my name tomorrow. That's how the world survives. Elias's jaw tightened. Then maybe we stop the world. Harold's smile returned, thin and dangerous, spoken like a true heir. The tension was unbearable. The hum of the servers filled the silence, the air thick with power and memory. Finally, Elias lowered his gun, but not in surrender. He turned toward the nearest terminal. You said everything runs through this. Harold's eyes flickered with interest. Yes, including the accounts that pay for the air you breathe. Elias looked at Emily. Then we don't need to kill him. She frowned. What are you doing? Elias placed the ledger on the console, opening the black box beside it. We feed the truth back into the system. We use his own network to destroy him from the inside. Harold's face changed the faintest crack in composure. You wouldn't. Elias smiled faintly. You built it, father. You should have built it stronger. He connected the recorder to the system. The terminal blinked. The servers groaned. Data began to pour through audio, files, the ledger itself. Harold stepped forward, panic bleeding into anger. Elias, stop this. Emily's voice was steady. It's too late. The screens flared white. Across every monitor, the Vander Hale Foundation's network began to crumble, data cascading into chaos, accounts freezing, assets vanishing into digital fire. Harold's voice rose, desperate now. You think you can control what happens next? You're killing millions of innocent lives. Elias's eyes never left the screen. Then maybe the world should remember what you call innocent. The hum of the servers turned into a roar. The lights flickered, then exploded in a cascade of sparks. The air filled with static. Emily shielded her face as the system began to collapse, the empire of gold finally turning to dust. And through the chaos, Harold Vander Hale screamed not in pain, but in fury. The sound of a god watching his heaven burn. As the servers erupted in light and smoke, Emily realized they hadn't just broken a man, they'd broken the illusion that power could last forever. And in that shattering moment, the world outside began to wake. The world was burning gold. The servers screamed with heat, light bursting from the terminals like veins of lightning tearing through the dark. Alarms echoed through the warehouse, shrill, panicked, alive. Sparks showered across the metal floor, igniting loose papers and fragments of history that refused to die quietly. Emily Carter stumbled backward, her eyes wide against the glare. The storm of data lit up the room like a cathedral of fire. She could feel the hum through her bones, the end of something vast and terrible. Elias Vander Hale stood in the center of it, motionless, illuminated by the flashing light. The monitors around him scrolled faster than the eye could follow, account numbers, names, encrypted files collapsing in on themselves. Every empire his father built was disintegrating, every secret bleeding out into the void. Across the room, Harold Vander Hale was on his knees. His pristine composure had cracked. His voice came raw, ragged. "You fool," he shouted over the chaos. "You think you've won. You've destroyed everything." Elias turned slowly, his expression calm, almost mournful. "That's the idea. You can't control what happens now. Harold's voice broke into a rasp, desperate and furious. Do you even understand what you've unleashed? Economies will collapse. Governments will turn on each other. The poor will starve while the rich reinvent themselves. The world doesn't change. Boy, it just mutates. Elias looked down at him, and for the first time, there was pity in his eyes. Then let it. Maybe the world deserves to feel what it's been feeding on. Emily's voice cut through the smoke. Elias, we have to go. The whole system's going critical. He didn't move. The light from the screens reflected in his eyes, twin flames that refused to die. Not yet, Elias. Her shout barely reached him through the roar of collapsing servers. He stared at his father, the man who had carved morality into currency, who had turned loyalty into profit. Harold's face twisted, half shadowed, half devoured by the firelight. You think you're destroying me, but you're just finishing my work. Every system burns before it's rebuilt. That's the secret, Elias. Destruction is creation. Elias stepped closer, his voice low, trembling with fury and grief. You don't get to turn ruin into wisdom. Harold's smile was faint, bloody. You sound just like me. Something broke in Elias's eyes, then not rage, but sorrow. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the black box, and tossed it at his father's feet. It clattered against the floor, its red light flickering faintly amid the chaos. That's your legacy? Elias said quietly, your voice, your confession, let the world hear it. Harold looked up, eyes gleaming. You'll drown in it too, maybe, Elias said, but at least I'll drown clean. He turned, grabbing Emily's arm. Now we go. They ran. The hallway outside was already filled with smoke. The air tasted metallic, the walls pulsing with the energy of the dying system. Somewhere above, sprinklers tried to come alive but sputtered out, drowned in the surge of power. Emily's lungs burned. Which way? She shouted. Elias pointed toward a maintenance tunnel. That way it leads to the loading docks. They sprinted through the corridor, boots slamming against steel. Behind them, the roar of collapsing machinery chased like a storm. The ground shook, dust falling from the ceiling in clouds. When they burst into the open air, dawn had arrived. The sky above Zurich was bruised with smoke, a golden haze that caught the rising sun like fire in glass. Emily turned, staring back at the factory. Flames licked from shattered windows. The empire of gold was burning from the inside out. Elias stopped beside her, his breath harsh, his face streaked with ash. It's done, he said, voice raw. He's finished. She shook her head slowly. No, the system's finished. He just started the fire. Elias stared at the blaze, silent. The wind caught his coat, the smell of smoke clinging to him like guilt. Then maybe that's enough. They began to move away from the site, down an old access road that wound through the mist. Behind them, distant sirens wailed authorities, fire trucks, maybe even what was left of the Vander Hale private army. It didn't matter anymore. The story had escaped. For the first time in days, there was no running, only walking. By midday, they reached the outskirts of the city, quiet, almost unreal in its normalcy. The news had already begun to spread. Screens in shop windows flashed headlines in every language. Global Foundation under investigation, massive day, a leak exposes corruption. Vander Hale empire collapses overnight, billions in assets frozen. Authorities in multiple countries respond. Emily stopped in front of one display, her reflection merging with the image of Harold Vander Hale, his face now public, his power unraveling. Her voice trembled. It worked. Elias stood beside her, unreadable. It worked. But his tone carried no victory, only exhaustion. She looked at him. You should be proud. He shook his head. Pride built this mess. They moved on. The city around them hummed with the quiet panic of awakening people, reading headlines they didn't yet understand, institutions scrambling to protect illusions. It was the beginning of something vast, uncertain, irreversible. That evening, they found shelter in an old riverside safe house one Marcus had once used during the early years of his rebellion. The walls were lined with old maps and files. Dust hung in the still air like memory. Emily sat by the window, staring out at the Limmat River. The water glowed gold in the fading light, reflecting the city's uneasy calm. She could feel the exhaustion in every bone of her body, not just from running, but from feeling too much. Behind her, Elias stood silent, staring at the ledger on the table. The book looked smaller now, powerless, just ink and paper. Yet the world outside was shaking because of it. He spoke softly. "You said something once, about fire destroying everything, even what's worth saving." Emily turned to him. "Yeah?" He looked up, his expression unreadable. "You were right." She frowned. "You regret it?" He hesitated. "Regret doesn't change anything." Emily studied him, then nodded slowly. "Neither does guilt. You did what he wouldn't, you ended it." Elias walked to the window, the city's reflection washing across his face. "I ended him, but not what he made me." "You're not him," she said firmly. He looked at her, and for a moment the hardness in his eyes softened. "Maybe not, but I carry his shadow." Emily's gaze fell to the photo she kept folded in her pocket. Lily, smiling beneath the desert sun. The image felt like a promise she hadn't yet kept. She whispered, "Then maybe we both carry ghosts." Elias exhaled, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "Then let's make sure they rest." Night fell over Zurich. The city glowed with unease, the quiet before history shifts. Across the river, television screens flickered with breaking news. Whistleblower data leads to international arrests. Charitable foundations under scrutiny. Emily watched as the lights flickered over the skyline. The truth was spreading wildfire through glass. She turned to Elias. "So what now?" He looked at her, the faint orange glow of the city reflecting in his eyes. "Now we disappear, the story's out. The world doesn't need us anymore." Emily's voice was quiet, certain. "Lily does." He nodded slowly, then go to her. "And you?" she asked. He looked toward the window, toward the river reflecting gold. "There's always more to burn." She stepped closer. "Elias." He turned, meeting her gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. What began as survival had become something else entirely. Not redemption, not forgiveness, just truth, raw and unyielding. "You'll find her," he said softly, "and she'll know what kind of woman her mother became." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she smiled through them. "And what kind of man her uncle did." Elias's throat tightened. "Marcus would have liked you." She shook her head. "No, Marcus would have trusted you." He smiled faintly. "That's worse." They both laughed, quiet, fragile, human. The night wind moved through the open window, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed again, swallowed by the city's heartbeat. Elias looked out at the burning skyline one last time. "Everything gold turns to dust," he murmured. "Maybe that's the only way the light gets out." Emily took one last look at him before turning toward the door. As she stepped into the cool night, the sound of the river followed her, steady, eternal. She didn't look back. And as the city slept uneasily under the weight of its own awakening, Emily Carter walked toward the edge of the world that had once broken her, not as a victim, but as the echo of the truth it could no longer bury. The waves whispered like old secrets against the shore. The sun was low, spilling gold across the quiet sea, turning the world into something softer, something that forgave. Emily Carter stood barefoot on the sand, her hair lifted gently by the wind. The smell of salt and rain mixed with the scent of wildflowers carried down from the cliffs. The chaos of the desert, the fire, the empire of gold, all of it felt impossibly far away now, like another lifetime echoing beneath the sound of the waves. She closed her eyes and listened. It had been months since Zurich, months since the headlines that shook the world, since the faces of the powerful crumbled on the news, since the van der Hael name had become a symbol of everything wrong with wealth. Yet none of that reached this small coastal town where she had chosen to disappear. Here, there were no cameras, no questions, no ghosts of power. Only the sea, only her, and Lily. Her daughter's laughter broke the rhythm of the waves. Light and unguarded, it carried across the sand like music she had forgotten how to hear. "Mom, look," Emily turned. Lily stood knee-deep in the water, holding up a small, perfect shell, sunlight catching in her curls. She ran toward her mother, leaving small footprints that vanished almost as soon as the tide touched them. Emily knelt as Lily reached her, cupping her hands around the shell. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Lily smiled. "It sounds like the ocean's talking." Emily held the shell to her ear. A faint echo hummed inside, steady, endless. "Maybe it is," she said softly. Lily tilted her head. "What's it saying?" Emily smiled, her voice trembling just a little. "It's saying the world remembers us." For a moment they stood there, wrapped in silence that felt sacred. The sunlight reflected in Lily's eyes, bright and full of the future. Later that afternoon, the two walked back to the cottage they now called home. It sat at the edge of a cliff overlooking the water, small, whitewashed, with a roof of weathered tile and windows that always seemed to hold light. A garden of wild herbs grew along the path, tended by quiet hands and steady hope. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and sea breeze. Emily set a kettle on the stove while Lily sprawled across the floor with her sketchbook. Pencils whispered over paper, a seagull, a shell, a woman standing by the waves. Emily watched her for a moment, her chest swelling with something that hurt and healed all at once. She had spent years running from the world. Now she was learning how to live inside it again. When the kettle whistled, she poured tea into a chipped mug, her favorite one, painted with fading blue stars. She sat by the window, staring out at the sea. The horizon glowed faintly pink, the kind of light that made everything look honest. On the table beside her sat a small wooden box. Inside were only three things: Marcus's folded note, a flash drive, and a newspaper clipping from months ago. The headline read, "Anonymous donations revive global charities, billions flow into relief efforts after van der Hael collapse." Emily traced the words with her finger. She knew who had sent the money. The same unseen hands that had once hoarded the world's wealth were now forced, through the ledger's release, to give it back piece by piece, life by life. It wasn't redemption, but it was something close to balance. She smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "The world remembers." That evening, she and Lily sat by the fire. The sea outside was dark now, waves glowing faintly under the rising moon. The cottage hummed with quiet, the sound of wind against glass, the ticking of the clock, the warmth of peace earned, not given. "Mom," Lily's voice was soft. Emily turned. Do you ever miss the desert?" The question made her pause. She looked into the flames for a long time before answering. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but not for what it was, for what it taught me." Lily tilted her head. "What did it teach you?" Emily's voice lowered, carrying the weight of memory and mercy. "That even the emptiest places can hold something worth saving, and that light, real light, doesn't come from gold or glass. It comes from people who keep walking even when they're afraid." Lily nodded, her eyes shining with that unspoiled kind of wonder only children still believe in. Like you, Emily smiled gently, maybe, but mostly like Marcus, like Elias. Lily blinked. Will we ever see them again? Emily reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's forehead. Maybe not in this world, she said. But the sea remembers, just like the desert does. It keeps every story it's given. Lily leaned against her, eyelids heavy with sleep. Do you think they can hear us? Emily wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. I think they can feel us. The fire crackled softly, throwing shadows that danced across the walls, echoes of a past that no longer hurt. When Lily was asleep, Emily stepped outside. The night air was cool and full of salt. She walked to the edge of the cliff, barefoot, her heart steady. The waves rolled below, calm and endless, the moon's reflection trembling like a promise. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive, the last copy of the ledger. The same data that had once brought empires to their knees now rested between her fingers, weightless yet infinite. For a long moment she stared at it. Then she smiled a quiet, certain smile and threw it into the sea. It spun once, catching the moonlight before vanishing into the dark. The ocean swallowed it without a sound. Emily whispered, "Let it sleep." The wind lifted her hair, carrying her words across the water. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled softly, not a storm, but the earth's sigh of relief. As dawn broke the next morning, the world seemed new. The sky blazed with color, and the sea turned to liquid gold beneath it. Emily stood on the shore again, the waves washing over her feet. Lily came running down the hill, barefoot and laughing. Mom, look, the tide brought something." Emily turned, and there, caught in the wet sand, was a single unbroken diamond. It gleamed faintly in the sunlight, smooth and flawless. She knelt, brushing it free from the sand, the last fragment of the empire that had tried to destroy them. A symbol, perhaps, or maybe a reminder. Lily watched, curious. "What is it?" Emily smiled softly. "Just something the world forgot to take." She held the gem up to the light. It caught the sun and fractured it into 100 tiny rainbows, each one bright, brief, and beautiful. Then, without hesitation, she closed her hand around it and threw it back into the sea. Lily gasped, then grinned. "Why'd you do that?" Emily looked out over the waves. "Because some things are meant to stay lost." The sea shimmered, swallowing the light whole. As the morning rose, the ocean whispered its eternal song, and Emily Carter stood on the edge of the world she had once feared, her daughter's hand in hers. The desert was behind her. The gold was gone. All that remained was light, and for the first time it was enough. The sea stretched out like an endless mirror, carrying the dawn on its back. The air smelled of rain and salt, and beginnings the kind that came not from escape, but from acceptance. Emily Carter stood on the balcony of her cottage, the same one where she had rebuilt her life piece by piece, watching the horizon breathe. For months she had lived without fear. No more running, no more shadows on her doorstep, no more secret names whispered into phones at night. The world had taken what it wanted from her, her peace, her innocence, her safety, and in return, it had given her something rarer, purpose. Inside, she could hear Lily humming softly, the sound of a pencil scratching against paper. The rhythm of her daughter's creation had become the pulse of their mornings. Emily smiled faintly, wrapping her sweater tighter around her shoulders. It had been 6 months since Zurich, 6 months since the Aurum Initiative burned, and though the world had not healed, perhaps it never could, something had shifted. The powerful had fallen, the corrupt had been exposed, the names once written in gold now rusted on the pages of history. Yet for every tower that fell, something smaller and quieter had risen in its place, foundations rebuilt by honest hands, charities rediscovered, communities rising from ruin. Across continents, anonymous donations had sparked miracles. Hospitals rebuilt in war zones, schools reopened in forgotten towns, aid funds replenished by unseen benefactors whose sources no journalist could trace. Emily knew the truth. She could see it in the numbers that flashed quietly in the news tickers, in the reports of recovery that never mentioned her name. The jewels they had uncovered, the ones scattered across the desert, lost to the storm, had been quietly converted, redistributed through networks Marcus and Elias had built before their deaths. Each gem, each unmarked transfer, had become a seed of restoration. And the world, though still imperfect, had begun to remember what it meant to give. She stepped back inside, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. The small home was bathed in soft morning light. Lily sat cross-legged near the window, her sketchbook open. On the page was a drawing of the ocean, vast, glittering, endless, and beneath it, a small plane soaring above a streak of gold sand. Emily smiled. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Lily looked up, her eyes bright. "Do you think they're up there, Mom, Marcus and Elias?" Emily paused. "What made you think of them?" Lily pointed to the sketch. "I dreamed about them last night. They were flying over the desert, and the wind was full of fire, but they weren't scared. They were free." Emily felt her heart tighten. Maybe that's what they were always trying to find. Lily tilted her head. "What's that?" Emily's voice softened. "Freedom, the kind you can't buy, can't steal, can't bury. The kind that lives inside you even when the world tries to take it away." Lily smiled faintly, tracing the outline of the plane. "I think they found it." Emily nodded, her throat thick. "I think they did too." She moved to the kitchen, poured 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one for the memory of those who couldn't be there. It was a small ritual, one she had never explained to Lily, but always kept. Every morning she left a second cup by the window, where the sunlight fell first. Today, the light caught the steam, perfectly gold and pure, rising like incense. Outside, gulls wheeled through the air, their cries cutting across the sound of waves. The world was alive again, not loud, not frantic, just alive. Emily stepped onto the sand with her daughter later that day, carrying a small glass jar. Inside it, she had sealed a folded note, Marcus's handwriting, faded but intact. The same note that had once led them to the truth. "You'll find me where we began. The light always falls north." Lily held her mother's hand tightly as they walked to the water's edge. "What's in the jar?" she asked. Emily smiled gently. "A promise." "To who?" "To everyone who never got the chance to make theirs." Lily's eyes widened slightly as her mother knelt, placing the jar at the shoreline. The tide crept forward, cool and shimmering, washing over her fingers. The water carried the jar away slowly, turning it in the light until it looked like a star drifting on the surface of the sea. Lily whispered, "Where will it go?" Emily watched it drift toward the horizon. "Where all truth goes. Somewhere it can't be hidden anymore." For a while, they just stood there, the sea murmuring its timeless hymn. The waves broke and retreated, and the light shifted over their faces, soft, forgiving, eternal. That night the wind rose. Clouds drifted across the moon, and the sound of rain began, light, steady, cleansing. Emily sat by the window, watching the drops trace silver lines down the glass. Lily was asleep, her breathing soft and even. The storm outside was gentle, not violent like the earth, reminding her that even the sky must cry to stay whole. On the small table beside her lay a stack of letters, each one addressed, each one sealed. Not to governments or newspapers, but to foundations, orphanages, and shelters around the world, the last of the funds she had managed to move, quietly, without trace. She signed each with the same name. For Marcus, for Elias, for the ones who were lost to gold. When she finished, she leaned back, exhaling deeply. The fire in the hearth flickered low, casting long, gentle shadows across the room. The world outside glowed faintly under the rain, every drop a spark of light falling into darkness, refusing to disappear. Emily whispered to the night, "You were right, Marcus. The light always falls north." As dawn came again, she woke to the sound of seagulls and the smell of wet earth. The storm had passed. The sea shimmered like glass beneath the early sun. She stepped outside, barefoot, her robe brushing against the wet grass. The air was cool, fresh, every breath like beginning again. From the cliffs, she could see the horizon glowing with promise. The world below was small and still, but in the far distance, something caught her eye, a faint glint over the waves. For a heartbeat, it looked like the tail of a plane breaking through the clouds, silver and silent. Then it was gone. Emily smiled. Maybe it was memory, maybe it was hope, or maybe, just maybe, it was Marcus and Elias still flying, still free, still guiding the light forward. She turned as Lily's voice called from behind her, sleepy and soft. "Mom, breakfast." Emily laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that carried across the wind. "Coming, baby." As she walked back toward the house, the sun rose fully over the water, turning everything sea, sky, and soul into gold. But this time, it wasn't the kind that could be hoarded or sold. It was the kind that healed, and so the story ended where it had begun, beneath an open sky, between silence and wind, the jet, the jewels, the desert all lost to time. But what remained was light, and the woman who had learned how to carry it. Because in the end, Emily Carter didn't find treasure in the sand. She found truth in herself, and that was worth more than gold could ever be. Final line. As the morning tide rose and erased the last footprints from the shore, the world remembered her not as the woman who found fortune, but as the one who set it free. The wind carried a strange calm that morning, the kind of stillness that feels like the world taking a breath before it remembers how to move again. The sea was glassy and endless, its surface catching fragments of sunlight like whispers of old gold. Emily Carter walked the shoreline slowly, her feet sinking softly into wet sand. Every step she took left a print the tide was already claiming, gentle, patient, inevitable. It had been a year since Zurich. A year since she'd set the truth loose and watched it ripple through the world like light through water. The ocean had kept her secret, and yet, somewhere in the world, it was still moving in headlines, in boardrooms, in quiet conversations over coffee. The Vander Hale name was no longer spoken with reverence, but as a cautionary echo. The empire had fallen, and from its ashes the forgotten had begun to build again. Emily didn't need to read the papers to know that. She could feel it, a slow healing, a rebalancing. Every wave that reached her feet seemed to carry a little less weight, as though the sea itself was forgiving the world. She looked up at the sky, the same vast blue that once stretched over the Mojave Desert, the same sky that had hidden a wreck filled with greed and redemption. It was different now, or maybe she was. Behind her, laughter broke the air, clear, bright, alive. Lily was chasing gulls again, her arms stretched like wings, her voice rising in pure joy. The sight made Emily's chest ache in the best possible way. That laughter was proof that all the pain had meant something. She smiled faintly. "Careful, sweetheart, don't chase the wind too far." Lily spun mid, run, her hair catching the light. "I'm not chasing it, I'm racing it." Emily laughed, shaking her head. "Then tell it it's already lost." Lily beamed, turning back toward the waves, her voice carrying over the water. "Mom says you can't win today." The gulls scattered like silver shards across the air. Back at the cottage, the day unfolded in peace. The small radio in the corner hummed softly with the morning news, the kind of calm, distant updates that no longer ruled Emily's life. Words drifted through the open window between the smell of salt and coffee. In a surprising move, several global charities have received record-breaking endowments from undisclosed sources. Economic recovery continues following last year's Vander Hale collapse. Emily stirred her tea, half listening. The reporter's voice faded into the background, replaced by the soft rhythm of the ocean. She didn't need to know the details. The ledger's work was still moving through the world, reshaping lives in places she would never see. A small, folded envelope sat on the table beside her, cream-colored, sealed with no return address. It had arrived 3 days ago, slipped quietly through her mail slot. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't need to. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, the same sharp, deliberate script that had written her fate in the desert. Elias Vander Hale. Her pulse had quickened the moment she saw it, but she hadn't torn it open. Instead, she'd let it sit there like an echo waiting for the right silence to be heard. Now, as the sea wind brushed her face through the open window, she reached for it. The paper felt heavier than it should, as if it had traveled through time, not just distance. She broke the seal gently and unfolded the letter. The words were short, written with the weight of a man who didn't waste breath. Emily, if you're reading this, it means I kept my promise. The world knows. The ledger lives where it belongs, in the hands of those who will never sell it. I left because I had to, not to run, but to guard what still remains. There are pieces of the network still buried, not of greed, but of truth. And someone needs to make sure they're never used again. Marcus believed that light always falls north. He was right, but I've learned something different. Light doesn't fall, it spreads. Take care of Lily. Take care of yourself. The rest will find its way home. Emily stared at the letter for a long time, her eyes blurring at the edges. Somewhere deep inside, something lifted, not sorrow, not longing, but a quiet peace. She folded the letter carefully, pressing her thumb against the ink, as if to feel the pulse of the man who had written it. Elias was alive, not gone, not lost, simply moving with the truth, carrying it somewhere far beyond her reach. "Mom," Lily's voice drifted in from the porch. "Who's the letter from?" Emily looked up, smiling. "An old friend." "Do they miss you?" Emily's voice softened. "No, sweetheart. I think they finally found where they belong." Lily nodded, satisfied with the answer, and ran off toward the beach again. Emily turned back to the letter, tracing the words, "Light doesn't fall, it spreads." She whispered it aloud, letting the phrase roll through her like a prayer. The truth wasn't a burden anymore. It was something alive, something that moved through hands, through hearts, through time. That evening, the sky turned to fire, streaks of orange and violet stretching endlessly over the horizon. Emily and Lily sat on the porch steps, wrapped in blankets, listening to the sea breathe against the cliffs. Lily leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "Mom, do you think the world's better now?" Emily smiled, watching the sunset melt into the waves. "Maybe not better," she said softly, "but it's learning." "Learning what?" "How to be honest." Lily nodded thoughtfully, her gaze following a single gull gliding over the water. "That's a good thing to learn." Emily kissed the top of her daughter's head. "It's the best thing." The air cooled as twilight deepened. The waves shimmered faintly in the fading light, alive, eternal, whispering truths only the sea could carry. Emily closed her eyes and listened, and for a moment she could almost hear another sound beneath the ocean's hum, the faint echo of engines, the distant cry of wind over metal wings, the ghost of a jet, still flying, still free. As the stars began to bloom across the night sky, Emily Carter realized that stories never really end, they simply change skies. The truth she had carried through fire and sand was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the world now, drifting between light and water, between memory and rebirth. And somewhere, beneath that same infinite sky, the wind whispered back, "Light doesn't fall, it spreads." The night arrived softly, as if afraid to disturb what peace the world had finally earned. The sea breathed in rhythm with the stars, each wave folding quietly into itself before stretching toward the horizon again. Emily Carter sat alone on the porch, a single lantern burning beside her, its glow trembling like a living heartbeat. Inside, Lily slept soundly, her small frame wrapped in the warmth of a world her mother had fought to give back. Outside, the air carried the scent of salt and rain, the whisper of the tide, and something else, the feeling of a story turning its last page. Emily leaned back, her eyes on the horizon where sky and water met in infinite silence. For the first time in her life, that silence wasn't heavy, it was kind. The world had changed quietly, almost without her noticing. The news no longer spoke her name, though her shadow lingered in every act of restitution, every new law drafted in the wake of the collapse. She wasn't a hero. Heroes belonged to myths. She was just a mother who refused to look away, and somehow that had been enough. She exhaled, her breath fogging in the cool night. The lantern flickered, the waves answered, and somewhere in the dark, a single gull cried the same lonely sound that had once echoed over a desert where gold had slept beneath the sand. At dawn, the tide receded further than usual. The beach stretched out long and glistening, rippled with veins of light. Emily walked the shore with her shawl drawn tight, her feet sinking into the cold sand. Every morning felt like a prayer here, to the ocean, to time, to the ghosts that had followed her this far only to rest at last. She looked down at her reflection in the wet sand. The woman who stared back no longer carried the hardness of survival, only the quiet grace of someone who had learned to live again. Something caught her eye, a shape half buried near the tide line. She bent down, brushing away sand. It was a piece of glass, smooth and sea-worn, faintly glowing in the morning light. But as she lifted it, she saw what it really was, a fragment of metal, curved and silver, small enough to fit in her palm. The edges were clean, not rusted like it had only recently surfaced. Her breath caught. It looked familiar, a piece of the jet, the one that had started everything. She turned it over, sunlight spilling across its surface. Etched faintly on the underside were the words she hadn't expected to see, words that time and tide should have erased. V.D.H. 47. Vander Hale. Her fingers trembled. Somehow, impossibly, the ocean had returned a piece of the past. Not as a warning, not as a curse, but as a message. She closed her hand around it, pressing it against her heart. The wind moved softly through her hair. For a moment, she thought she heard a voice in it, low, steady, familiar. Elias, light doesn't fall, it spreads. She smiled, tears blurring the horizon. You're still watching, aren't you? She whispered. The wind rose in answer, a whisper across the sea, carrying the faint echo of laughter, of engines, of men who had once dared to defy their blood. By afternoon, the sky turned silver with overcast calm. Emily sat at the writing desk by the window, the metal fragment beside her. She had been writing again, not for the world, but for herself, for Lily. The pages before her were filled with words not of confession, but of remembrance. She wrote about the desert's silence, the weight of the jewels, the hum of the black box, and the way truth had felt when it first escaped its cage. She didn't call it a story. She called it a promise. Her pen moved slowly, the ink flowing steady and patient. Some stories don't end when the truth is told. They echo in waves, in wind, in people who will never know the names of those who set them free. The desert is still there. The wreck still sleeps beneath its dunes, but the gold is gone. Its place grows something the sand could never bury, light. She paused, smiling faintly. The words looked like closure, and yet they felt like the beginning of something else. Outside, she heard Lily's laughter again, the same clear, endless sound that had become her compass. Emily set down the pen, folded the pages carefully, and placed them inside a small wooden box, the same one that had once held Marcus's letter. On its lid, She carved 3 words with the tip of her knife: the weight of light. That night the air was still and silver, the sky clear enough to see every star. The ocean shimmered faintly, carrying the reflection of constellations like jewels scattered across the surface. Emily and Lily stood at the edge of the cliff, their hands clasped, eyes lifted to the sky. "Mom," Lily whispered, "do you think the stars are watching us?" Emily smiled softly. "I think they're remembering us." Lily looked up at her. "Like the ocean does, exactly like that," Emily said. They stood in silence for a long while. Then Lily pointed upward, her finger tracing one particular star brighter than the rest, pulsing faintly above the horizon. "That one," she said. "It looks like it's moving." Emily followed her gaze. For a heartbeat it did look like movement, a flicker, a glint, a memory of light crossing through clouds. She felt her chest tighten, not in fear but in awe. Somewhere, maybe miles above them, maybe in memory, the sound of an engine whispered faintly across the sky. Emily's voice was a breath. "Fly safe, Elias." The wind carried it upward, a final message, a final grace. When they returned home, the lantern still burned on the porch. Emily paused before blowing it out, watching the flame dance one last time. "Good night," she whispered to the light. It flickered just once before dimming into darkness. The stars filled the void immediately, countless, eternal. And in that quiet, as the ocean cradled the shore and the night wrapped itself around the world, the story that began in dust and greed ended in light and peace. No headlines, no legacy. Just the faint echo of the sky where truth still moved, carried by wind, by memory, and by those brave enough to set it free. Final closing line of the saga. Long after the desert forgot their names and the world stopped counting their worth, the light they unleashed kept traveling endless, unseen, unstoppable, because some truths don't fade. They simply keep spreading,